How are you feeling? How long have you been here?
3 months, May 17th.
And what brought you?
That's difficult to answer.
Some idea.
I am not completely like other people.
What do you mean by that?
People dislike me because I am not completely like them. I am trying to do with my life something which few people try to do, and this influences my thinking and consequently my action.
What is it you're trying to do with your life?
Play the piano for people.
I'm not clear. How is it that playing the piano for people has eventually resulted in your being here in the hospital?
That's difficult to answer.
the end. There's a noise inside my head of crying people facing death. Is this the end? Is this the end? Oh, I'm burning in the stone. There's no place to hide. I'm burning in the stone. What have we done to the world? What have we done to the world? I'm burning in the stone. There's no place to hide. I'm burning in the stone. This is the final scene of
Marky got with Sharon, Sharon got Sharia. She was sharing Sharon's outlook on the topic of disease. Mikey had a facial scar and Bobby was a racist. They were all in love with dying, they were doing it in Texas. Tommy played piano like a kid out in the rain, and then he lost his leg in Dallas. He was dancing with the train. They were all in love with dying, they were drinking from a fountain that was pouring like an avalanche coming down the mountain.
I don't mind the sun sometimes, the images it shows. I can taste you on my lips and smell you in my clothes.
I don't wanna get married. I don't wanna be just like you. Nobody bothered to ask me. They said I ought to be just like you. Well, I could get a marriage license for a husband and me, so I could use it as insurance for my HART. Since I can file taxi with the same gender spouse, I shouldn't feel so bad getting kicked out of my house. Don't send me a rainbow. Your luck is never done shit for me. Don't wanna sit at your table. A fucking invitation to your party. Wanna celebrate a game on your cable TV. Well, trans lesbians are calling Southern bodies stuff to eat. You paid the world to see us to suck on some dick.
What up, guys? It was an extra queer introduction today. And we're originally going to do something else today. We were originally going to do Counter-Revolutionary Book Club. I don't have the energy to do Counter-Revolutionary Book Club today. I just don't. Counter-Revolutionary Book Club, I have to listen deeply. I have to interpret a complicated text. We are going to get back to it, I swear. We are going to finish Against the Gender Nightmare. We are going to do that. But, you know, our friend Stony Baloney, or he goes by social media comment section in the chat, he sent us over another Judith Butler talk, because remember last Friday we watched Judith Butler giving a talk at the new college in Florida, which is supposed to be the anti-woke college, and apparently they invited Judith Butler. And Chris Rufo said on Twitter that it was a rousing and rigorous discussion, but when we actually watched the video, it was not a rousing and rigorous discussion. It was not a debate. Judith Butler got literally zero pushback. The entire audience was fawning over her. The moderator was fawning over her, and I think a lot of us just sat back and said, this is the anti-woke movement. This is the anti-woke movement, inviting the wolf into the hen house and sitting the wolf down and giving the wolf a nice cup of tea and then kissing the wolf's ass and making sure everyone knows how stunning and brave the wolf is. That's literally the state of the anti-woke movement. Thank you, Christopher Rufo, for dropping the ball on that one, because I would bet all the money in my bank account Christopher Rufo did not bother to watch the talk that was given at the college that he is on the board of. So that got us going back and thinking about other Judith Butler talks. Now, we've covered Judith Butler on the channel before, obviously. But it kind of seemed to us like Judith Butler was doing this little exercise at the New College of Florida to go through a little bit of a rebrand, to push her ideas about the quote-unquote anti-gender people, which is a really Orwellian term. Anti-gender in this case means people that believe in the gender binary. The gender binary is men and women. Judith Butler is calling people who believe in the gender binary and want to uphold the gender binary anti-gender, which is ironic because it is actually queer theory that is anti-gender. It is queer theory, of which Judith Butler is one of the patron saints of. It is queer theory that literally wants to abolish gender. We were going to do Counter-Revolutionary Book Club today. For those of you who have never done Counter-Revolutionary Book Club, head over to my Substack, click on the book club link at the top. That's Counter-Revolutionary Book Club. We are working our way through some of the most dystopian documents that queer and gender activists are reading. And we're in the middle of, and we're about to finish up a document called Against the Gendered Nightmare, which not only argues explicitly for the abolition of all gender, it actually argues for the abolition of all civilization. This is like a gender nihilist document, or a complete nihilist document, I suppose. And so you can read it on the website right now. You can find links to read it, a PDF to download. You can listen to back episodes of the Counter-Revolutionary Book Club. You can get caught up. Join us for the concluding episode that will happen on Against the Gender Nightmare next week, probably. No, next week, definitely. It has to happen next week. Anyway, my point is this. Judith Butler is running around calling people anti-gender when in fact it is queer theory that is literally and explicitly anti-gender. And she was invited right into the loving open arms of the anti-woke college in the anti-woke state, the New College of Florida, to shill her insanity. But we kind of thought maybe Judith Butler's going through a rebranding exercise because maybe Judith Butler doesn't want to lose whatever funding she has from the federal government. And so she's trying to play nice, and she's trying to go, I'm not really dangerous. And even the moderator was like, does this person look like someone that wants to end Western civilization? And Judith Butler was like, I would never do that. And then Judith Butler was like, I have never heard of them teaching people not to say the words mother and father. But of course, we debunked that live on stream because I literally have government-funded trainings where they literally teach, don't say the words mother and father or brother and sister or boys and girls or any of these other gendered terms. So we started talking about going back and watching other talks that Judith has given. And this is a talk that Judith gave 11 days ago, less than 2 weeks ago. Professor Judith Butler, The Global Impact of Queer Theory. Well, this sounds interesting, doesn't it? The Global Impact of Queer Theory explores how queer theory continues to shape global politics, activism, and institutional change, blah, da, 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 da. So we're going to listen to this Judith Butler talk, and I'm told there are some golden nuggets about capitalism in it, which is, of course, I am always looking for. But before we get into that, a couple orders of business. Now, you guys might have noticed something. You guys might have noticed something on the start of the stream. I had a video that has the hashtag, or the handle rather, queer Marxism. And you're going to say, Carlin, you started another fucking Twitter account? And I'm going to say, yeah, I did. But, you can't be mad at me because you can't dangle the handle queer Marxism in front of me. I was literally shocked no one else had this handle. You can't dangle that in front of me and expect me not to start a Twitter account. My original plan was to do all of this through the Better Discourses Twitter account. That was the original goal. And we are still going to do stuff through the Better Discourses Twitter account. But here's the thing. I found out that the handle queer Marxism was available on Twitter. And so I appropriated one of my old sock accounts that I don't really use for anything anymore, because the reason I used to have a lot of sock accounts was Twitter would not allow you to see people that had blocked you unless you had a sock account. And so I created a whole bunch of sock accounts, and now I can see whatever I want because Twitter removed the thing where you can't see people if they block you. You just can't respond to them or interact with them. So now I can see everything. So now I have all these old sock accounts and I'm like, these aren't being used for anything. So I reappropriated a sock account to take the queer Marxism Twitter handle, and it's not verified yet because I just changed my profile photo. I'll be able to verify it in a couple days, but it is me. As you can see, I'm logged into it. We have our new mascot. We named him the other day. His name is Grigory, as in Grigory Rasputin, and he is the mascot, and he is the curator of what I'm calling the queer Marxism project, which you can find if you go to, wait for it, queermarxism.com. Because not only did I get the Queer Marxism Twitter handle, I also got queermarxism.com, which again, I don't know how the ever-loving F that hadn't been registered yet. And just to top it all off, I also have the Queer Marxism handle on YouTube now. So I started a YouTube channel just to put clips for the Queer Marxism project. I started a YouTube channel that is youtube.com/queermarxism. So I'm literally just using this to upload clips so I can embed them on a website and to have kind of like a repository for them, because I was like, if it's available, I'm going to take it. So we now have the Queer Marxism Twitter handle, we now have the Queer Marxism website, and we now have the Queer Marxism YouTube. We should probably be registering Queer Marxism on some other stuff too. I'll have to work that out, but I really think that these are the main ones. And well, yeah, this is unironically something I like. I like when leftists learn more from my content than they do from their content, because it means I'm ahead of all of them on everything. And there's stuff that's being worked on behind the scenes on queermarxism.com that you guys don't know about yet and you guys can't see yet because it's not linked to the homepage. Right now, the only thing that exists on the homepage is literally an email sign up and some links, and that's it. But I am building something for this, because what I want to do is I am working on several books, as you guys know. One of the books that I'm working on right now is called Be Gay, Do Crime, the true story of the Mary Nardini Gang. You can find advanced chapters of that book over on the Red Menace Collective Substack. That is redmenacecollective.substack.com. But one of the things I wanted to do for that book, and also for a book that is literally called Queer Marxism that will, fingers crossed, come out in June, I wanted to build a companion website for them where people can go on and actually read the primary source documentation that I'm discussing in that book. They can view the pictures that I'm discussing in that book. They can find all the zines, all of the primary source evidence. So I had always wanted to build a companion website for this anyway, because obviously I can't put all the primary source evidence in the book, but I can link them to a place where they can go and actually just see this stuff for themselves. And what I'm doing is I'm creating kind of a museum of queer Marxism, a haunted house of queer Marxism, as it were, which is actually unironically like a very queer thing to do. I'm just having fun with the branding of it. Like, I'm creating something that's actually very basic. It's a repository of information to help people find stuff and look at stuff, because I don't believe you should ever have to take my word for anything. I believe that you should be able to go online and look at everything yourself and decide what you think about it. So I'm basically creating a very basic website to do that. I'm just zhuzhing it up with a little flair, and I'm really excited about it, and I'm having fun with it. And side note, can I tell you guys, I was up until 4 a.m. last night using AI to debug this website. This is actually great, because I know enough about building websites to be dangerous. I've been building websites since I was 15, but it's never one of like my primary things that I've done. So I'm not as good at it as some people, but I was having this massive problem on the part of the website you guys can't see yet last night. And I literally used AI to debug it. I said, AI, I'm trying to do this thing on WordPress, and I have this specific theme installed on WordPress, and I can't do this thing. And can you write me some code to make it do this thing? And it took a little bit of doing, but AI actually managed to like write the code to help me debug the very specific problem that I had. And I was like, oh shit, AI really can do everything. I was more of a tripod girl at first. I don't know that I ever had an Angel Fire website. I definitely had a GeoCities website at some point, but I liked Tripod. Tripod was my jam for some reason. I don't really remember why. I think I built my first ever website on Tripod. Yeah. Anyway, that's something that I'm working on. And of course, we're going to be taking clips from like, part of the point of all this is we have so many clips. And, you know, I've been thinking for a long time about, like, what is the best way to organize all of the information that we have? Is there a way? And this is part of where the Unwoke Wiki started out as a project, and the Unwoke Wiki hasn't died yet. It's just taking a nap. The Unwoke Wiki is just taking a nap. It's not died yet. But, like, this was the original thought behind the Unwoke Wiki. I was like, we have all this metric ton of information, and we don't have any place to send people where they can see it in one place, because when you have this much information, it's actually really difficult to organize. See, I should have gone to librarian school. This is what they teach you in librarian school. I'm having to learn librarian school on the fly, okay? And so what I've decided is I have several projects in mind. And this is just one of a couple different things that I think I want to build that are basically like warehouses for information. But what I've kind of come to learn is that we need to get focused in the way that we're presenting this stuff, which is difficult when you have so much of it and the breadth of it is so big. And so I think the idea of focusing in an entire initiative on, if you want the queer stuff, if you want the stuff related to this militant gender ideology that wants to abolish gender in the nuclear family and all that stuff, that's here. If you want this other stuff, that's over here. And to try to like segment this out a little bit, because that at least allows us some focus. And obviously, like, the queer stuff is kind of unique on the far left in that it is really extreme and really dystopian, and it's sometimes harder to present that among other material. Anyway, this is a very long-winded way of saying there is a method to my madness, and I know sometimes it takes me longer to solidify these ideas and these concepts than people would like. Like, believe me, there's no one that would like me to be moving faster than me, but I think that I feel very strongly that this is the right direction, and I feel very strongly that I've been saying for a minute, I think queer activism is making a comeback. After October 7th, we really saw the left die down in terms of queer activism, because basically all the energy got sucked out of everything else and put into Palestine, and we're going to be talking about what happened about Trump Tower today in a second, but all the energy got sucked out of everything else to put into Free Palestine, and now with Trump back in office, they're kind of going back to their greatest hits, and we are already starting to see an uptick and a resurgence in queer activism, and so I think the timing of this is actually really important, and the timing of this is what I think is actually going to make this successful. So I don't think it's an exaggeration to say that we can create the libs of TikTok of queer Marxism. What's going to exist on this Twitter account are videos of queer Marxism, are photographs of queer Marxism, of all the craziest shit all in one place. And I don't care if people follow it because they just think it's crazy. I don't care if people interact with it, they just think it's crazy, because all of it's going to have nuanced commentary around it that we can control, that the conservative mouthpieces are not going to take away from us. And I really do think that we can work together to build this up actually rather quickly, if I'm being honest about it. If we all work together on it, we make sure we're retweeting things, we make sure we're sharing things, we make sure we're spreading the word about this. This is a very specific thing that is going to house some of the craziest clips that people have ever seen in their lives. And it'll be a place where we can constantly put this stuff. And we have the opportunity to build a really cool resource, and I'm already working on books for it as well, so that we can get all this stuff out into the public and people can actually just go and have a places where they can go, where they can learn and see for themselves, okay? So I think this is more important than ever because, quite frankly, the conservative right has lost their fucking minds. I mean, I don't know if there's any going back for where the conservative right is right now. And they have absolutely lost it on so many levels. And we saw that directly today when Jewish Voice for Peace took over Trump Tower. Now listen, Jewish Voice for Peace is a leftist organization. 100%. It is a leftist organization. It is a Marxist organization. We have watched Jewish Voice for Peace on this channel in association with Haymarket Books, in association with all the Free Palestine stuff on more than one occasion. And one of the things that Jewish Voice for Peace does is they stage these kind of spectacle protests. And they did it today at Trump Tower, where they basically all did a sit-in at Trump Tower to protest the deportation of that Columbia student who, by the way, that really is turning into a George Floyd uprising. I told you guys on Monday. I literally said this on Monday on my website, Carlyn, KARLYN.substack.com. I literally said the moment that this guy got arrested, Trump had created a new George Floyd. He created a martyr. This is 100% Trump's doing. And the far left took this and ran with it, and they shot out of a cannon, just like they shot out of a cannon with George Floyd in 2020. And Jewish Voice for Peace is an organization that's been around for a long time. They're an organization that was always on the Free Palestine side. That is what they believe. And they are 100% made up of Jewish people. Anyone who tells you those aren't real Jews, they're lying. We've watched this organization. We know who these people are. They are 100% Jewish. The problem is that they're not Zionists. They are an anti-Zionist organization. Okay? Now, for my money, telling a group of Jews, regardless of whether or not I agree with them, because again, we're not on their team. I am not on the same side as Jewish Voice for Peace. They are Marxists. They are revolutionary socialists. We don't team up with them. However, it is disingenuous and intellectually dishonest to tell a Jewish person that they have to support Israel, or to tell someone that they're literally not Jewish if they don't go along with Zionist propaganda. It is intellectually dishonest. But the thing that was most telling to me about all of this today was that there were so many Zionist accounts on Twitter that were covering these protests, and almost none of them, with very rare exception, almost zero of these accounts said that these were Jewish people. So this is a guy I follow, and he is a raging Zionist, and he tweets about this stuff all the time, and he's obviously Jewish. Breaking: pro-Hamas mob has invaded Trump Tower in Manhattan. This too is not speech. deport any foreigners in the crowd. Well, no, it is actually speech. It is. It's also trespassing. They are trespassing as private property, but to say that's not speech, literally false. But the big point I'm making is this Zionist did not mention that this organization is Jewish Voice for Peace. Just completely ignored that this is a lobby full of Jews and said they're all pro-Hamas protesters. Oh, really? They're all Jewish, or the vast majority of them are Jewish. This is an account that posts a lot of this footage, and this is a Zionist account. We've watched their clips before because they do post the footage, which is really what we're interested in. We're interested in the footage. I don't care if someone's a Zionist or not. If they provide me with primary source evidence, I'll still watch it. Breaking: dozens of protesters with no organization name have occupied Trump Tower in New York City, chanting, "Free Mahmoud, free them all." Oh my word. Oh my word, the terrorism! The terrorism! They're literally terrorists. They're chanting, guys. They're chanting! They're Jewish people chanting. Here's another conservative account. Breaking: paid Democrat protesters have taken over the first floor of Trump Tower, chanting anti-ICE and pro-Hamas slogans. The police are refusing to make arrests. I saw conservatives all over Twitter this morning going, these are paid protesters. They don't have jobs. They're only protesting because they don't have jobs. So the jobs argument is back. We are in for another summer of they don't have jobs. They don't have jobs. They don't even have jobs. Okay, here's my question, conservatives. Here's my question. Where are your jobs? Why are you all on social media in the middle of the day going, they don't have jobs, they don't have jobs? Where the fuck are your jobs that you get to be on social media in the middle of the day going, they don't have jobs, they don't have jobs, they don't have jobs? It's my job to be on social media. Like, my job is literally to be on social media so I understand what's going on. I can teach people stuff. I can build my platform and reach my audience and all that stuff. Like, that is literally my job. But if you are on social media going, they don't have jobs, they don't have jobs, they don't have jobs, they don't have jobs, where the fuck is your job? What job allows someone to be on social media all the time complaining on Twitter about what other people are doing with their time? I have no evidence that these are paid Democrat protesters, by the way, so that's a completely false claim. Jewish Voice for Peace is a well-established organization. They've been around a long time. They do stuff like this all the time. So this is not some sort of made-up organization, and anyone who takes the time to Google it can damn well find that out. They're also not pro-Hamas because they're literally Jewish. Their signs were literally saying they were Jewish. Even Marjorie, protesters have occupied Trump Tower in New York City, chanting, "Free Mahmoud, free them all." I know the owner of the building, and he will definitely be pressing charges. Fuck around and find out. How anti-Semitic. How anti-Semitic of Marjorie Taylor Greene. How anti-Semitic of Donald Trump to press charges on Jewish people. In fact, it might... Because you guys know, right? You guys know? Well, they usually cite that and then they can't actually link to the actual ad. So I'm starting to believe that a lot of those ads that they cite looking for paid protesters are Photoshop because they never have the actual link to the ad. So. But just like so anti-Semitic. And you guys remember, the left trains people to get arrested. This is a professional activist organization. The left trains people to get arrested. Do you think it's out of the realm of possibility that they trained people to get arrested at this protest so that they would be prosecuted for it? So that they could then make a whole big stink out of Donald Trump is literally persecuting Jews for chanting and for freedom and just wanting to be against censorship. Because that's exactly what will happen. Now, you're right. There were a few people, not that one, this one. Loomer, Now listen, I don't agree with Loomer on this issue. I don't. But you have to give credit where credit is due. Loomer was one of the few Zionists that actually acknowledged that this organization is Jewish Voices for Peace. Now, I don't agree with Loomer that these are pro-Hamas. I don't agree with Loomer's position on this college student protester. Loomer is correct that they're Marxists, 100% correct about that. But you know why I give Loomer points? Because she acknowledged that they're fucking Jewish. And apparently that's the bar. That's the bar. That's the bar that has been set for conservative journalism. You pass the test if you acknowledge that the Jewish protesters from the organization Jewish Voice for Peace are Jewish. You fail the test if you deny that the Jewish protesters holding giant signs saying that they're Jewish, wearing t-shirts saying that they're Jewish. You fail the test if you don't acknowledge that those people are in fact Jewish, even if you don't like it. And Owen Schroyer passed the test too. I gotta say, I've always been skeptical of the InfoWars guys because I don't actually, want to take them seriously. Not that I don't think they're very nice. Fine. But it's just I find it to be a little conspiratorial and inflammatory sometimes. But I gave Owen Schroyer a follow today, not on this account, a different account, because this is a different account for something else. I gave Owen Schroyer a follow today because he said one of the groups involved was Jews Say Stop. Well, it's actually Jewish Voices for Peace. Jews Say Stop is just their slogan. There were many Jews protesting today. No one is mentioning this. Why? Will the same heavy-handed approach being called for these protesters be applied to the Jews that are protesting today? Deportation, long prison sentences, or will they not apply here? I think that's a really great question, Owen. I think that is a really great question indeed. And I got to tell you guys, I got into it with some conservative journalist on Twitter. And I just have to show you guys a little bit of this unhinged lunacy. So this guy, David, and we'll even just go back to the beginning. This guy, David, was in my feed all day. David is the associate editor for a conservative news site. They're supporters of terrorists. And I called him an anti-Semitic Jew hater because I gotta be honest, I was really enjoying calling everyone an anti-Semitic Jew hater on Twitter today, just because I've been called an anti-Semitic Jew hater so much when I don't even care if people are Jewish. And so I enjoyed just throwing that out today. So David had this long back and forth with me where he's like, you're committed to your act. Are you method acting? Are you gaslighting? And I'm like, David, do you have any evidence? And he said, oh, you're method acting, huh? Pretty amateur. Are you paid to do this, or are you a Jew hater yourself? Did you cheer on October 7th? And I said, well, according to Israeli newspapers, Israel killed their own people on October 7th. So no, I think that's actually pretty sad. Yup, go with that. Hamas brags they did it. Well, I'm literally showing reporting from an Israeli newspaper. Anyway, David went back and forth with me for hours. And then he said, for someone claiming to be an anti-communist, you sure don't seem to be able to recognize propaganda. It was just this is conservative journalism. And then, of course, he ends with, oh, come on, Carlin, Jew hater Borisenko. You can do better. Why not start complaining about the Rothschilds and the World Jewish Conspiracy? And that is where you want to go, right? Maybe post some pictures of rats with big noses. You know you want to let it out. And I was like, sir, I cover the far left, sir. Well, you can be a Zionist all you want, but you're not going to find friends here. I mean, I'm just going to be real honest with you, Yenta. I'm going to be real honest with you. People can believe whatever they want, but your people are behaving extraordinarily badly. And it seems as though you can't even acknowledge that these people are Jewish because they disagree with you. And what does that tell you? What does that tell you? That you are so personally fucking offended that someone who's Jewish wouldn't be a Zionist. You are allowed to be a Zionist. You are allowed to believe whatever the fuck you want, but leave other people alone and stop questioning their very identity because they don't bend the knee to your fucking bullshit. I've had it with Zionists. I'll tell you that right now. I have had it with Zionists. Yeah, oy fucking vey. Oy vey. You want to know why? Because the Zionists that I interact with over and over and over and over and over again tend to be the most intellectually dishonest, unethical, fucking retarded people on the internet. And maybe there are good Zionists out there, and maybe they can prove me wrong. And by the way, I'm not just talking about the Jewish Zionists. The Christian Zionists are even worse. The conservative Zionists are even worse. In fact, I would go so far to say I was up late last night, guys. I was up until 5 a.m. contemplating with deep sincerity about how I don't even care if the left wins anymore because conservatives are behaving so ridiculously that they deserve to lose. These are the thoughts that keep me up at night. I'm like, I am a devout anti-communist. I create more anti-communist content than anyone on the internet. I have massive archives exposing the communists, and time after time after time after time after time after time, I have to hear from Jewish fucking Zionists or conservative Zionists or Christian Zionists. I don't give a fuck. I have to hear, you're not even an anti-communist because you don't agree with us. Go fuck yourselves. None of you cover the left like I do. And if you want to complain about it, then go do something productive for a change. The right deserves communism. The right deserves communism so badly. They deserve to suffer. Their children deserve to suffer. Their grandchildren deserve to suffer. Are you fucking serious? See, and this is what you get from the Zionists. Do you want me to hide in your attic? Do you want me to hide in your attic? The Holocaust. Yeah! That's what you get from fucking Zionists. Are you shitting me? Anyway. So I worked out some feelings today on Twitter where I called everyone who would not admit that these protesters are Jewish. I called all of them Jew haters. And I said that anti-Semitism has no place here. I am not opposed to Jewish people. I am opposed to unethical, intellectually dishonest, Zionist bullshit and gaslighting and gatekeeping. If we can't acknowledge what the truth is, if we can't acknowledge that a group from Jewish Voices for Peace holding signs saying that they're Jewish, wearing t-shirts saying that they're fucking Jewish, and if you look at them up close, they look Jewish too. If we can't acknowledge that these people are Jewish because they are not bending the knee to Zionist bullshit, then we do not live in reality. And, you know, maybe I'm a little bit protective of my little bastion of sanity on the internet, where we are going to hinge into reality on this channel. We are going to look at primary source receipts. We listen to people we disagree with all the time, and we're going to see what is actually going on. And no amount of bullshit talking points and Zionist narrative is going to prevent us from doing that. All right? So, with that out of the way, who wants to watch some queer theory? Who wants to watch some queer theory? Shall we? If you guys feel like supporting the work I'm doing, head over to my Substack. That is Carlyn, KARLYN.substack.com. You can sign up for a membership for $8 a month, $80 a year. You guys keep me in business because I am 100% funded by you. And I got to tell you guys, there's never been a better time to fund my work because I need to remain completely independent. Remaining completely independent is the only way that I actually get to say what I think, rather than following some bullshit script, because what should be clear today to everyone is who are the people following a bullshit script. Because that's what happens on the right. You get handed your talking points, you get handed a paycheck, and then you've got to read those talking points. If you deviate from those talking points, you're going to be excommunicated real quick. The only way that I'm allowed to speak my mind is because people support my ability to do so. You can send in super chats, you can sign up on my Substack, you can sign up on the Red Menace Collective. This is a separate project where you get access to my books before they're actually written. Lots of ways to fund my work, and I can't do it without you guys. I really appreciate it. All right. Let's get into some Judith Butler, shall we? Let's get into some Judith Butler. I don't know why I'm talking in a funny voice. That's what happens. That's what happens when I have to rant. Wait, seriously? Judith Butler wrote the foreword of the Jewish Voice for Peace book about anti-Semitism? Do you know what I saw? Judith also endorsed Sophie's latest book, Enemy Feminisms, and Judith said something like, "Where would we be without Sophie Lewis?" I was like, oh, Judith is endorsing our girl. She's endorsing the Ginger Dragon. All right, guys, we are watching a presentation from Judith Butler all about queer theory. If you have questions about anything that's being said, please do let us know in the chat. We do answer all questions. If this is your first time watching socialism with us, please ask questions. Don't make assumptions. And we will teach you as much as we can about the far left and all of the crazy shit that they do. Let's get this party started. Oh, God, that's loud. Oh, no. Okay. We don't need piano.
This seminar is provided by the United Proud Women, a nonprofit organization dedicated to empowering sexual minority women through knowledge, community, and advocacy. And we're truly thrilled to host this event. It is an extraordinary honor for me to introduce our guest speaker, Professor Judith Butler, who will deliver a lecture on the global impact of queer theory.
Yenta, you're going to get a 24-hour timeout now because we've already dispensed with your gaslighting bullshit. And if you're actually here to learn, you don't need to be participating in my chat. You people try to gatekeep everyone else. I am the gatekeeper of my fucking chat. So you are getting a 24-hour timeout and you will not be able to talk for the rest of it. And you're lucky you're not getting permanently banned. Goodbye.
Thinkers of our time, and their work scarcely requires an introduction. Nevertheless, to provide the context for our diverse audience, I would like to briefly highlight a few key works and areas of engagement. Their groundbreaking scholarship has fundamentally transformed the landscapes of gender studies, philosophy, cultural studies, political theory, literary studies, and psychoanalysis, among others. Many of you are undoubtedly familiar with seminal texts in queer theory, such as Gender Trouble, Feminism, and the Subversion of Identity, as well as Bodies That Matter on the Discursive Limits of Sex. And in our previous gender studies seminars, we have discussed two additional pieces of texts, Imitation and Gender Subordination, as well as Undoing Gender. These works have profoundly reshaped our understanding of gender, sexuality, and power, and continue to fuel critical debates more than 3 decades after their publication. And beyond these foundational texts, Professor Butler's scholarship has continually pushed the boundaries of critical thought, and the contributions are hard to overstate. Most recently, their 2024 book, Who's Afraid of Gender, takes on contemporary struggles over gender and the rise of global right-wing movements, an intervention that couldn't be more timely. In addition to their scholarly impact, Professor Butler has long been a prominent public intellectual and activist. Their advocacy spans global LGBTQ and feminist movements, and they have been an outspoken critic of wars against Palestine. They are also actively involved in human rights organizations, including the Center for Constitutional Rights in New York and the advisory board of Jewish Voice for Peace. And on a personal note, introducing Professor Butler today is deeply meaningful to me. Their work profoundly shaped my intellectual journey and sparked my passion for gender and sexuality studies during the very first year of my undergrad. And I know I'm not alone in this. Many young scholars in our community would credit Professor Butler's work with inspiring their ongoing exploration of gender and sexuality across various disciplines. So as we look forward to the insights Professor Butler will share, let's embrace this invaluable opportunity to learn from a truly distinguished scholar. So now please join me in offering a warm and heartfelt welcome to Professor Judith Butler. And Professor Butler, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much. I'm pleased to be here. I hope you can hear me well. Okay, excellent. Let me say first, I'm very grateful for this invitation. I was asked to speak about queer theory, as you know, and I think you will hear queer theory in action in what follows. Queer is, as you know, sometimes used as a term of identity. I say, I am queer, or I ask if you are queer, and by that expression, I indicate that I'm interested in knowing something about you. But when queer was first claimed as a term for an affirmative theory, for a movement, it was not at all conceived as a term of identity. It was even, I would say, anti-identity. It was a form of critique, a way of understanding anew the basic vocabularies by which the gendered and sexual world is organized. Moreover, it was a way of working with insult and degradation. If you were called queer in English prior to the 1990s, especially in the United States, you were not only being insulted, but you were receiving a verbal threat of possible violence against you. Queer then designated a practice of turning a hurtful and damaging term into something that could gather people together in an affirmative way that could produce a kind of solidarity. So
like communism?
Queer, not so much identity, but yes, solidarity.
Queer, not so much identity, but yes, solidarity, like the good comrades. Wow, Judith. Wow, this is going to be a banner presentation. I can already tell that.
It also named, or still names, a practice of critique, transforming something damaging into something affirmative. And this queer critical practice was not just dedicated to taking apart the heteronormative structures of society,
that means capitalism,
but it also embodied the power of transformation and a potential for new solidarities. It mattered that queer theory came into being during the time that the AIDS crisis was most acute in the United States. We saw that our lives were not considered to be worthy, that resources were not being dedicated to research.
Judith is talking about the ACT UP movement. If you missed Socialism Saturday this past week, I highly recommend that you go back and watch it. I want to know how much Judith Butler was involved in the ACT UP movement, because we basically watched a documentary about the ACT UP movement, which was one of the kind of like original battlegrounds for breeding militant queer theory, or what evolved into militant queer theory. So basically what happened is ACT UP, which was an AIDS activism campaign in the 80s, eventually transformed into Bash Back. Bash Back was militant queer activism. This is where the Mary Nardini gang comes out of, and this is where all of the really crazy queer stuff comes out of today. And so I wonder how much Judith was involved in ACT UP in the 80s. But if you missed Socialism Saturday, I definitely recommend going back and watching it. It was just one of the best episodes we've had. It was so enlightening to go back and watch that documentary about ACT UP, because it's so relevant to all this stuff today.
And that the process, medical research, and that the process of our dying and even our deaths were not marked and not mourned. Many felt that their lives were treated as dispensable, not only by the government and its health services, but by the culture at large, including the media. We sought to assert our collective existence and the worth or dignity of our lives, our desires, our genders, the forms of intimate association we had chosen, and to demand healthcare and our own rights to live. At the same time, we did not want to fit into the list of LGBTQIA, etc., because we did not want to be treated as an identity.
You don't say.
But why? What remains this resistance to identity?
Indeed.
Well,
actually,
on the one hand, we accepted
let's pause there. Let's pause there. Do you guys know the answer to that question? Why do queer Marxists resist identity? Why do queer Marxists resist the idea of identity? Queer Marxists are vehemently opposed to identity politics. Now, conservatives don't know this because they believe that liberals and progressives are the same as queer Marxists. They're not in any way. The people who introduced identity politics are not queer Marxists. They were always opposed to that. They were always opposed to gay marriage from the very beginning. So why are they opposed to identity? Because identity means that you have categories. Categories means that you have oppression and hierarchy. Exactly. Identity leads to categorization, which leads to hierarchy. These are collectivists. These are Marxists. Identity creates a hierarchy, which leads to inequities. Very good. Identity is property, and having property creates inequity. Inequity, not inequality. Inequity. We have to be careful about that. Identity forms hierarchies. They want no differences between anyone, no hierarchies. If there are no categories, if there are no differences, then there's no hierarchies. There's no oppression. Identity is about individualism, and socialists think in terms of the collective. Yup, it's normative, upholding capitalism. Yup, opposed to labeling or categories. Exactly. It's been used as a hierarchical delineator. Exactly. Marxism is about getting rid of hierarchies. Hierarchies mean someone has more resources than you have. What they want to do in getting rid of identity, they say if we have identity, we have categories. And if we have categories, there's inevitably going to be people in one category that have more than people in another category. So when we're talking about equity, what we're talking about is flattening all hierarchies, making everything the same. The same means no categories, no identities. The minute you have identity is the minute that you have categories. Judith is, yes, an identity. This is also true. Your identity, your category is forced on you by capitalism because capitalism created the social construct of the category in the first place. That's what they believe about men and women. And I promise you, Judith is way more into this gender nihilist stuff than she lets on in these. Judith is like, in these interviews, she's like, we just don't like identity politics. Okay, what Judith is talking about is gender nihilism. She's talking about a gender accelerationism. We've read and are continuing to read gender accelerationist and gender nihilist documents. We know where Judith's ideas come from, but Judith has just this way of just smoothing it over. We just don't want identity politics. Well, why, Judith? Why? We don't see queer as an identity. Well, why? Because you don't want identities to exist.
Resistance to identity. Well, on the one hand, we accepted that sexuality and identification were complex, and that sometimes a life story cannot be adequately represented by an identity category. For some people, sexual orientation changes over time. For others, gender changes. We want to think about gendered and sexual lives in time and in space, sometimes staying very stable, but sometimes undergoing important shifts. This was and remains a key point linking queer theory to feminism. We think we know what a woman is, what it means to be a woman. The society around us tells us what a woman is, or more often, what a woman should be. But then we find that those definitions can be too narrow, too restrictive, and we seek greater freedoms. We do that not just as individuals, but as people who are affected by cultural and social change, and who, as a result of those changes, become capable of making change, entering into social relations in order to make them more free, more equal, and more just. If we want to undertake a certain kind of work, or appear in a certain way, or love someone our family disapproves of, well, we may find that we risk no longer belonging to the category of gender that was originally assigned to us.
There it is.
Some of us then seize that category as an historical reality, as an historically changing construct, which means we are formed by it, but we also have the power to
this is really important for people to understand Judith Butler's perspective, okay? She's talking about you were assigned an identity that was created for you. What she means was, Stony Baloney said it earlier, created for you by capitalism. The left believes, queer Marxists believe, that capitalism created the gender binary. The gender binary means men and women. They created it by putting men in the socially constructed roles where they were in the workplace, where they had access to all the power and all the money. They put women in the socially constructed roles of doing the unpaid labor of having and raising the nuclear family in the household. And by the way, the roles are almost entirely constructed around reproduction, which is why they're actually trying to decouple gender from reproduction right now. That's a whole other story, but that is actually happening, and it's crazy. But the basis of what Judith believes, and what I want people to understand, is Judith does not believe that men and women are real. Judith believes that the genders of men and women are socially constructed constructs that were forced on us by capitalism. She doesn't believe that they're real. And yes, that system is called the patriarchy, where men are in the workplace, women are in the home, men have all the power and all the money, women do the unpaid labor. That is what the patriarchy is.
Proves of, well, we may find that we risk no longer belonging to the category of gender that was originally assigned to us. Some of us then seize that category as an historical reality, as an historically changing construct, which means we are formed by it, but we also have the power to form it anew, to change the category into a more livable one we can affirm,
like non-binary.
And that affirms us.
Judith
But for
is
others, the
non-binary.
category has to be left behind, and new categories of gender must be created to make life more livable, to find a language and social world that we can affirm, and that affirms us as well. To be any identity at all involves an identification with a social category. That category has been produced by others. It comes to us with saturated historical meanings. And yet, our identification can intervene in that history, even opening up a different future. Identification and identity are not the same. Stuart Hall has said this. So has Jacqueline Rose. We do not close the gap between ourselves and the social category that defines us through identifying with the category. To identify with a category means there's a difference between oneself and the category.
Okay, so what she's saying there is to buy into the gender binary of men and women. To say you are a man or to say you are a woman means you are identifying with capitalism. You are identifying with the categories that capitalism created for you. Judith is non-binary. Judith publicly identifies as non-binary. What that means is Judith has a refusal to acknowledge that men and women are actually real things. Non-binary means no binary. It is an argument against gender. It is an argument in favor of abolishing the categories of men and women entirely. Listen to that again.
The social category that defines us through identifying with a category. To identify with a category means there's a difference between oneself and the category. Identification names that gap, but so too does queer theory. We can identify with a category and say, yes, this is me, this category. Or we can disidentify with the categories imposed upon us. And that disidentification involves a negative or critical energy that is crucial for any effort to make the world anew. Jose Esteban Munoz knew this and wrote about disidentification as a queer theoretical construct. Similarly, we say, for instance, that we become our genders. And this proposition, drawn from the work of Simone de Beauvoir, is considered a defining characteristic of queer theory. And yet there is no straight path that defines that becoming. To become a gender is to undergo a series of deviations, to be part of a process that is open-ended and without teleology. Well, how central is this category of gender to queer theory? Well, it is as central to queer theory as sexuality. After the 1980s and throughout the 1990s, at least in the Anglosphere, we saw different permutations of queer theory, queer of color theory, examining how race and sexuality intersect with gender, queer Marxism, asking how gender and sexuality.
Queer Marxism mentioned by name, they never do this. They never use the term queer Marxism. I wasn't, say again, Judith?
intersect with gender, queer Marxism, asking how gender and sexuality are reproduced by structures in society and the economy.
Asking how gender and sexuality is reproduced. What Judith is focusing on there is the idea of social reproduction theory. Social reproduction theory is the idea that social systems will reproduce themselves until they are disrupted. This is specific in regards to the nuclear family because they believe, again, capitalism created the gender binary, men and women. It put women in the home doing the unpaid labor, raised the next generation of proletarian workers in the nuclear family. The nuclear family to the left is the literal means of reproduction of capitalism. They believe that in raising children with capitalist values in the capitalist family, they sometimes call it the Fordist nuclear family, as in Henry Ford. They believe that capitalism will reproduce itself over and over and over and over and over again until the reproduction mechanism of capitalism is disrupted. That is what the nuclear family is to the left. That's why they want to abolish the family. It also has to do with property relations, passing generational wealth down from parent to child. So you're keeping that wealth privatized within the family. It also has to do with community care, collective care, that people should have access to health care outside of their blood relatives and stuff like that. There's a lot of different reasons for it, but the core argument for abolishing the nuclear family is disrupting the social reproduction of capitalism. It's the revolution of the proletariat against sex and gender, the socially constructed categories of sex and gender. That's crazy. I can't believe she said that.
Different permutations of queer theory, queer of color theory, examining how race and sexuality intersect with gender, queer Marxism, asking how gender and sexuality are reproduced by structures in society and the economy.
And by the way, I don't care how many categories Judith lists about all the different variations of gender and queer theory. It's all queer Marxism. At its core, it is all about the oppressor versus oppressed narrative. At its core, it's all about being created by capitalism, which is what the core of queer Marxism actually is. It's the abolition of capitalism. That's what they want. So every single category that Judith is about to list is queer Marxism. Just because she's named it specifically, don't be confused.
Queer crip theory, asking how the form and capabilities of the body enter into established ideas about gender. Queer Asian studies, querying forms of gender and power in China, Japan, Korea, but also South Asia.
Seriously?
Drawing on a wide range of cultural traditions from religion and even martial arts, which is, after all, a place where gender is constantly negotiated. It is important to
Yes, well, crip theory is another term for disability justice. Disability theory is like a subset of queer Marxism. By the way, this is where you also get into fat studies. Fat studies is also under queer Marxism. It's related to disability justice. Fat studies is crazy. Hey, thank you for the super chat, two ladies. You're two ladies. You never have to apologize. You work so hard. You give what you can. I really do appreciate it. And my birthday is coming up, and we don't want to talk. So, I still have a month before I turn 29 again. All right. I actually had to do math in my head to figure out how old I was the other day. And I was like, I'm that old? I honestly did. Like the other night I had a moment where I was like, how old am I going to be on my birthday? My birthday is coming up. And then I was like, no. I'm like, I am not that old. Like, what the fuck happened? And then I cried. Thank you, though, two ladies. I do appreciate it.
To remind ourselves of several histories as we consider the way that gender and queer both have been accepted as.
Bite your tongue. Fuck you, John. Fuck you. Fuck you. We don't use that language in this chat. We don't talk that way in this house, young man. It is a lie. It is a lie. It is a vicious lie. I am not. I'm going to be 29 and no one's taking it away.
As terms of identity rather than ways of thinking about the structures of power and the potential for solidarity. In Anglophone feminism, gender has been a key framework beginning in the 1970s, established even more firmly in the 1980s as a necessary part of almost all feminist scholarship and policy work. Gender was not for feminism originally a term of identity. It was a framework for thinking about the unequal distribution of advantages in society, the division of labor that assigns women certain tasks, the reproduction of power dynamics that secure masculine power and dominance. Gender was thus a framework for analyzing a key form of power in society, one of the most fundamental forms. And then, of course, there were, and remain, many approaches: materialist, psychoanalytic, ecological, intersectional, Black feminist, as you know. And I underscore this point for at least two reasons. First, feminism and queer theory have more in common than is generally accepted these days. Gender is but one term that joins them, but also what joins them is the aspiration to live in a world without the fear of sexual violence and discrimination, to transform the world so that there is greater freedom and equality, and to find ways of living that are free of forcible constraint, pathologization, or criminalization. There are many emancipatory desires that link feminism, queer theory, and activism, and trans theory and activism. We use separate terms to describe these forms of study and modes of social engagement, but many of them are actually lived at the same time and together in ways that profoundly shape and intersect with each other. Indeed, as you probably know, the anti-gender ideology movement is one that is linked to rising authoritarianism, to a backlash against feminism, struggles for racial equality, and gender freedom. The same.
What is the difference between critical theory and queer Marxism? Nothing. Nothing. There is no difference. Okay, so critical theory can apply to more subjects than just queer and gender. So critical theory can be critical race theory. It can be some other stuff too, I guess. But when we're talking about topics related to gender, related to the nuclear family, related to not even really like trans stuff. Honestly, trans is different. But more disability, fat studies, all of that falls under critical queer theory. Critical queer theory is queer Marxism. So what, like, critical theory is Marxist at its core, but critical theory as a school of thought applies to more areas than just queer theory.
Same state powers that deny women reproductive freedoms are denying trans people of adequate and gender-affirming health care. The same powers are denying freedom to women, to people of color, to trans and queer people. It is as if the devastation of our political freedoms is now the condition for authoritarian emergence. The books taken off the shelves at libraries and censored in course curricula are feminist, queer, and trans. In other words, the state powers that would restrict freedoms, oppose equality, and deny our various existences are grouping us together in ways that we do not always group ourselves. In the United States, as you probably know, there is a new sense of dread about the future after the election of Donald Trump. Some fear the end of democracy, and others fear the end of the world. It is a dispiriting moment when climate catastrophe makes itself known through enormously destructive fires and floods, when the plans for deportation of migrants have already begun to be implemented, and rights of citizenship for those who have been born in this country with undocumented parents are also threatened. Over and against this very pessimistic vision are several social and political movements that will continue to strengthen during this time. Feminism is one of them, but so too is a complex alliance of movements dedicated to equal rights, gender freedom, racial equality and justice, the opposition to capitalism, carceral power, and climate destruction.
Oh, I'm sorry, what?
Such movements are not—
What was that, Judith? What was that? Again?
Migrants have already begun to be implemented, and rights of citizenship for those who have been born in this country with undocumented parents are also threatened. Over and against this very pessimistic vision are several social and political movements that will—
Hang on. Do you have a specific question? Because this is unhelpful and it's unproductive. So what do you have questions about specifically, and what don't you understand about what you're seeing? And by the way, for people who might be new, we don't agree with any of this stuff. But the purpose of watching this stuff is to understand what the left actually believes. And so if you come into the chat and you go, it's all bullshit, and you stomp your feet, that doesn't help you understand what they believe. It doesn't help anyone else understand what they believe. So if you have a specific question, put that in the chat. If you have a specific objection, use your words as an adult and make an intellectual critique. But this is unhelpful and unproductive. Okay. And listen, I understand. I really do. I get it. I really do. But you got to make sure you understand it, okay? Anyway, back to this.
This very pessimistic vision are several social and political movements that will continue to strengthen during this time. Feminism is one of them, but so too is a complex alliance of movements dedicated to equal rights, gender freedom, racial equality and justice, the opposition to capitalism, carceral power, and climate destruction.
So Judith is saying that all of these movements, so we've been hearing, right? We've been hearing people say the left is defeated. The left has given up. The left has no hope anymore. Judith Butler is saying, here are the movements that are actually going to get more powerful during Donald Trump's second administration. Here are all the things that are actually going to gain power under Donald Trump. Listen again.
Are also threatened. Over and against this very pessimistic vision are several social and political movements that will continue to strengthen during this time.
Several social and political movements that are going to strengthen during this time of the second Trump administration.
Feminism is one of them, but so too is a complex alliance of movements dedicated to equal rights, gender freedom, racial equality and justice, the opposition to capitalism,
Bing.
Carceral power, and climate destruction.
All the major leftist movements. All of them. And that's all Marxism, by the way, and they're all opposed to capitalism. They just do it all in different ways.
Such movements are not political parties, nor are they fully represented by any existing political party. They put pressure on the party system. They include solidarities that struggle against racism, capitalism, and extractivism, campaigns against misogyny, homophobia, and transphobia, struggles for affordable education and the forgiveness of debt, and global struggles against imperial wars, including the genocide in Gaza and the mass death in Sudan. And they point out the failure of government to provide basic health services, shelters, and education for the people, a failure that is part of the destructive operation of capitalism and heteronormative patriarchy as they work together.
Capitalism and heteronormative patriarchy work together, Judith? Is that because they're the same thing? Is that because capitalism created normativity? Capitalism created the patriarchy? They're basically the same thing? Is that why they work together? Is that what I just heard, Judith? Because you just mentioned capitalism a whole heck of a lot. I'm sorry. I just want to get just one more time.
Are also threatened. Over and against this very pessimistic vision are several social and political movements that will continue to strengthen during this time. Feminism is one of them, but so too is a complex alliance of movements dedicated to equal rights, gender freedom, racial equality and justice, the opposition to capitalism, carceral power, and climate destruction. Such movements are not political parties, nor are they fully represented by any existing political party. They put pressure on the party system. They include solidarities that struggle against racism, capitalism, and extractivism, campaigns against misogyny, homophobia, and transphobia, struggles for affordable education and the forgiveness of debt, and global struggles against imperial wars, including the genocide in Gaza and the mass death in Sudan. And they point out the failure of government to provide basic health services, shelters, and education for the people, a failure that is part of the destructive operation of capitalism and heteronormative patriarchy as they work together.
Yeah, it's funny that Judith never mentioned capitalism when she talked to the New College of Florida, isn't it? Isn't it? And this, guys, is why you have to learn how to speak the language of the left, because people who've been watching socialism with me for a while understand everything they just heard. Literally every single thing. You think she's reading out of her new book? She might be reading out of her new book. That would make sense. Every single thing that Judith Butler just said is related to radical revolutionary socialism on the left. It is literally all about overthrowing capitalism. But if you don't know the language of the left, you don't know what you're listening to. Yeah. This is pure queer Marxism heroin. And you know what? Judith Butler is so good at just smoothing it over so it all just sounds nice. We just want fairness for everyone, guys. That's all we want. We just want people to be fair and everyone to be happy. And I'm totally safe. I would never want to abolish gender.
Like many others, I was appalled and stilled by the executive order issued on January 20th of this year, entitled Defending Women from Gender Ideology Extremism and Restoring Biological Truth to the Federal Government. That's the title of the executive order. Well, how can women need defense from gender, given that women, as a plural category, is a gendered category, if not the most important one, in the history of gender studies and policy? When I published last year, Who's Afraid of Gender, I noted there that the campaign against gender ideology was very late to arrive in the United States. In the last few years, before, I would say 3 months ago, it had a life.
The campaign against gender ideology was very late to arrive in the United States. Do you want to know why that is? Because conservatives don't pay attention to the left, and they didn't pay attention, and this stuff had been brewing on the left for years, for decades. Queer theory started the first mention of queer as an anti-capitalist ideology was in 1964. I actually reverse engineered this stuff. Maybe there was one earlier that I haven't found yet, but that's as far back as I've gone so far. It was 1964 was like one of the first mentions of queer as an anti-capitalist ideology. In the 70s, this stuff started brewing in these queer like subculture movements within the punk community. In the 80s, it got really cultivated. This was the queercore movement. This was also ACT UP and AIDS activism. Like in the 90s, this is when militant queer activism really started kind of like forming. This is where Bashback kind of started forming. It kind of came out of the closet in the 2000s. So Judith Butler is very correct in saying the opposition to gender ideology showed up really late. It did. And the reason that the opposition to gender ideology showed up really late is that the right does not listen to the left. The right doesn't pay attention to the left. The right doesn't follow the left. They don't do any sort of formal analysis on the left that's actually hinged into reality. All they do is spew their talking points over and over and over and over and over again. They ignore problems that are literally right in front of them with all of their might. And that's why godmother of queer theory herself, Judith Butler, is saying, you know, guys, queer activist, like this anti-gender ideology stuff, it actually showed up really late. It did. They had almost won. They were running away with it. There was no opposition to gender ideology until the last couple years. It's not as though gender ideology didn't exist. It's not as though queer Marxism didn't exist. It's that no one wanted to take on the problem. No one wanted to talk about it. They all just wanted to pretend it wasn't happening, or the left is crazy and they are mentally ill. And that's what the conservative right did, and they stuck their heads in the sand for decades and decades and decades, and that is why the problem grew as big as it did. If you want to know why there's so many detransitioned children in the country, it's because the conservative right did not take this problem seriously. It's 100% the fault of conservatives because they allowed this to happen completely unopposed for decades. You cannot blame activists for getting wins. You cannot blame activists for being strategic to push their values and how they view the world. I absolutely can blame the conservative right for providing no opposition to these people until it was almost too late. And it still might be too late, by the way, because Trump's executive orders aren't going to stop them, as Judith Butler's probably going to tell you in this presentation.
in conservative evangelical churches, in the CPAC conferences, which is the Conservative Political Action Committee, where seminars were regularly dedicated to combating gender ideology. The term itself was coined by the Vatican back in the 1990s, taken up in Latin America by both Catholic and evangelical churches, mending a rift between them, publicized as an urgent topic at the World Congress of Families, especially in 2017 when Trump sent his representatives. It also appeared as an incendiary topic in presidential campaigns in Costa Rica, Uganda, South Korea, Taiwan, France, Italy, Argentina, and Brazil, to name a few. But the United States press hardly noticed. Viktor Orban in Hungary effectively allied with the Russian Orthodox Church in condemning gender ideology, and in turn, Putin declared his fidelity to J.K. Rowling's critique of trans rights in 2022, when he, Putin, sought to establish that gender freedoms associated with the West were a threat to Russia's spiritual essence and national security. It seems that Ukraine's effort to join the EU was a problem in part because the EU does seek to defend gender freedoms and opposes gender-based violence and is in favor of anti-discrimination law, especially protective of women and other sexual and gendered minorities. The anti-gender ideology was developed over the tenure of the last two popes. However, with Francis, despite his occasional progressivism, there was an acceleration of the discourse, an insistence that gender was a threat to man, to woman, to their differences, to civilization, family, and the natural order of human relations, to nature itself. And those Vatican discourses cast gender as a demonic power analogous to the Ebola virus or even Hitler Youth.
Wow.
Well, Trump comes late to this terrible party, although in 2018 he instructed his Department of Health and Human Services to declare sex as an immutable feature of human personhood, leaning into the Vatican's invocation of natural law. At that time, his administration claimed that genitalia and plain language were the two criteria to be used in determining sex. The immediate political goal of this lexical move was to block trans people from gaining protections against sex discrimination under what is called Title IX, the legal instrument in the United States that prohibits sex discrimination in any federally funded activity. At that time, the Supreme Court had only begun to consider the case Bostock v. Clayton, which was decided in 2021, and which posed the question of whether discriminatory treatment against trans people can be considered legally as a form of sex discrimination. Ultimately, the justices, some of whom were appointed by Trump, decided that Title IX could be used to protect trans people against discrimination on two grounds. Firstly, the sex assigned to a person at birth can be different from the sex the person assumes in time. This was taken by the Supreme Court to be just a matter of fact. And secondly, for anyone to be treated unequally on the basis of a perception of their sex is an established form of sex discrimination. So trans people, if they are discriminated against on the basis of the sex acquired or assumed in time, are suffering sex discrimination. And if they are treated unequally on the basis of how they are perceived, how their sex is perceived, that is also a perfectly legitimate basis for a sex discrimination complaint. So the problem in discrimination, as it's outlined in this legal context, is not the sex you are or the sex you were assigned. It has very little to do with what is biologically the case. It has everything to do with how your sex is perceived and how you are then treated on the basis of that perception and whether that treatment results in discrimination. It's simply wrong if one is treated unfairly on the basis of a prejudiced understanding of what one's sex is. The argument of this Supreme Court case, which I consider in the book, Who's Afraid of Gender, The argument of this case, written by Neil Gorsuch, a Trump appointee, seemed to have defeated Trump's effort at the time to make the initial sex assignment given to any person permanent and unchangeable. It's no wonder that in the executive order issued in January of this year, the presidential offices explicitly include among its dictates the need to correct any misapplications of Bostock v. Clayton. Here, Trump has to stand up to a court and its decision, which is generally considered to be sympathetic to his aims, but in this case contradicts his executive order. It's interesting that in the most recent executive order, Trump's legal team shifts from identifying the immutable, unchangeable features of sex from genitalia, 2018, to gametes, 2025. Why this shift? And by the way, what does it mean that one can change one's mind about what exactly is immutable about sex? The existence of intersexed people has posed a problem for sex assignment from the beginning, given that genitalia can be combined or mixed in some ways. Gametes appear to be less problematic, but why? There's a larger gamete and a smaller one, and that is said to be the immutable difference between female and male. But note, the smaller one emerges from the larger one. So the larger one is primary. In the beginning, the sex, the only sex, is female. That was not the conclusion they hoped to see. But there are two other problems with this standard. The first is that no one consults gametes at the moment of sex assignment, or for that matter, at conception. They are not observable. Thus, to base sex assignment on gametes is to rely upon an imperceptible, non-observable dimension of sex at the very moment when observation still remains the main instrument for sex assignment. With genitalia, when genitalia was the criteria, it was supposed to be easy to observe and to name, but that always depended on the lens through which one sees and the ability not to see complexity when it appears. Moreover, as the Society for the Study of Evolution maintains in a letter they published on February 5th of this year, the statements claimed to be scientific by the government are in fact contradicted by extensive scientific evidence. The scientific consensus, they write, defines sex in humans as a biological construct that relies on a combination of chromosomes, hormonal balances, and the resulting expression of gonads, external genitalia, and secondary sex characteristics. There is variation in all these biological attributes that make up sex. So the term sex names a complexity. They remind us, this Society for the Study of Evolution, that sex and gender result from the interplay of genetics and environment. Such diversity is a hallmark of biological species, including humans. Okay, end quote. Interplay, interaction, co-construction, all these are scientific paradigms we find in the biological sciences that are applied to the question of sex determination. The language of immutability belongs more properly to a natural law tradition, one that claims that male and female are established by divine will and so belong to a version of creationism. So I would suggest to you that Trump is smuggling creationism into his scientific definition of sex. Indeed, sex differences are immutable features of the person, as both Pope Paul and Pope Francis have affirmed. For Trump to speak in the name of science, quite apart from this cameo appearance of the gamete theory, is simply to insist that God decreed the immutable character of two sexes and only two, and Trump is decreeing said fact again after echoing the word of God or letting his word become God's word and acting as if it is science speaking. So most biologists agree that neither biological determinism nor biological reductionism can provide adequate accounts of sex determination and development, and that's important. But it does not follow that gender theorists deny biology or biological reality just because they reject biological determinism and biological reductionism. Indeed, both determinism and reductionism are bad science. Complexity characterizes the biological sciences in their most current state, and complexity is exactly, by the way, what queer theory affirms. The presidential edict asserts the power to define what sex will be, which means that it treats gender ideology, or sometimes its
Bro.
extremist version, as something that must be
Why do we never use this own of the libs? Why do we never do this? Why is it? Listen, I don't recognize you. I think you're new to my content. Welcome. We love new people to the content. You need to listen and you need to ask questions, though. And I'm going to be very clear about this. If you think that it's a good own on Judith Butler to say, you don't even know what a woman is. Judith Butler, as I've previously explained, identifies as non-binary. Judith Butler believes the category of woman is a socially constructed category that was created by capitalism. She also believes the category of man was a socially constructed category created by capitalism. Judith Butler does not believe she is a woman. Judith Butler does not believe the category of women or the category of men exist. That's what they mean when they say non-binary. Non-binary means no binary. To leftists and to anyone who understands the left, conservatives sound retarded when they say, I bet you don't even know what a woman is, because they believe that the idea of a woman is just an artificially constructed category that is not real. So they don't care what your definition of a woman is. They want to abolish all gender. Bro. Okay, bro. Okay, you know what? You're right. Why don't you go up to Judith Butler and say, excuse me, ma'am, you don't even know what a woman is. And Judith Butler's going to go, yeah, you're right. You got me. All my life's work, it just doesn't mean anything. I was wrong. You're right. Do you think that's really going to make a fucking difference? This is why we tell people to shut the fuck up and sit down and listen when they first start encountering this content. Now, you're going to do one of two things. Either you're going to stop and you're going to listen and you're going to ask questions, or if you keep saying bullshit in my chat, I'm going to time you out for 24 hours. The reason I'm going to time you out is because your job right now is to listen. Your opinions on this, your dunking on the libs is not something that we are interested in. It is not something that's productive. It is not something that is ever going to change anyone's mind. It has never stopped this ideology in the years that you guys have been doing this shit. Has anyone's mind been changed by saying, they don't even know what a woman is? No one's mind has been changed. Literally 0 minds have been changed by that argument. The left does not care what a woman is. This entire presentation is about the fact that gender is an artificially constructed category. That's what it said at the very beginning. And so you're either going to ask questions and you're going to learn, or we're going to make sure that you zip it, okay? We don't mind you being here. We don't mind, we like new people, but when new people don't listen and new people think they come in and they think they know everything, because you said earlier, I already know all this stuff. Oh, do you? Do you? Do you really? Because it doesn't seem like you do now. So now that you know that you don't know everything in the world, now that you know that you actually don't understand Judith Butler's ideology, because if you did, you wouldn't have used this own in the first place. Time to sit down and listen. And if you have questions, you can let us know. But I don't want to hear any more fucking opinions.
destroyed and replaced in public discourse and all federally funded activity, which includes sports and higher education, research, and healthcare. The state claims that gender ideology is something that exists. But what if gender ideology does not exist? What if it is an insult, a slur, a phantasm, something conjured, abbreviating and demonizing a complex, often fractious, productive, and indispensable form of scholarship, social policy, social movement, law? As it stands right now, any reference to gender in government-financed activities, including university grants, health policies, civil rights protections, qualifies it for defunding. But if there is no such thing as gender ideology, if this very notion is a politically invested phantasm opposing.
See, this is what we like new people in the chat doing. Asking questions. This is a good question. So the socialists want to create a whole new society and culture by abolishing the current one. Yes. Yes. That's exactly right. In fact, sitting on my desk, waiting for years for me to frame it and hang it on my wall. Hang on. It's got some stuff piled on it right now. It was under a bag of cough drops. Sitting on my desk, I have a t-shirt I got at the Socialism 2023 conference when I went undercover at it. That t-shirt, if you guys can see it, literally says abolish everything. The left not only wants to abolish everything, the left, I'll make this bigger so people can see it. The left not only wants to abolish everything, the left actually puts their desire to abolish everything on t-shirts and sells them at their events. So yeah, they want to abolish everything, including gender, including the family, including everything. Judith Butler is a gender nihilist.
A slew of social policies that deprive women, children, trans, queer, non-binary, and intersex people of their rights and freedoms, then gender ideology can be said to be construed or even constructed. Paradoxically, it was the claim that gender is socially constructed that enraged its opponents,
Ding.
especially when they misread that theory to mean that a social category has the magical power to bring what it names into being.
Yo, she just said it. She's like, these anti-gender people are so pissed off at the idea that gender is a socially constructed category.
Then gender ideology can be said to be construed or even constructed. Paradoxically, it was the claim that gender is socially constructed that enraged its opponents, especially when they misread that theory to mean that a social category has the magical power to bring what it names into being.
So what Judith means by that, she says, these anti-gender people, they think that by naming a category, which is man or woman in this case, that actually makes that category true. So Judith is like owning the conservatives here. She's saying, you guys don't even actually understand what we're saying. Her position is, just because you call something a woman doesn't mean the category of woman actually exists. And she's saying conservatives are so dumb, they believe that just because you call something a woman, that magically creates the category of women. Listen to this again.
Children, trans, queer, non-binary, and intersex people of their rights and freedoms, then gender ideology can be said to be construed or even constructed. Paradoxically, it was the claim that gender is socially constructed that enraged its opponents, especially when they misread that theory to mean that a social category has the magical power to bring what it names into being.
Does everyone understand that? Does everyone understand what Judith Butler just says? I want to do a pause there because this is actually an important point. She's saying that just because you create a category called man or a category called woman, that doesn't make it a real thing. And that opponents of gender ideology believe that just because you create a category of man or a category of woman, that makes it a real thing. And she's calling that literal magical thinking.
That was a false view, and it is the one that they now own for themselves as they seek to produce a social consensus that gender ideology not only exists, which it does not, but that it is a dangerous force, which it is not, threatening every aspect of life that people hold dear, man, woman, family, the nation itself. Well, it's difficult to explain this attack on gender. How do we explain the fact that gender now stands for queer and trans theory and policy, feminist scholarship, reproductive rights, progressive law, and civil rights? In the US, authoritarianism can only keep power if the people let it do so. So why is it that people would be willing to support anti-gender policies? What fears are they having? Why are so many people afraid of gender? How did it become gender such a dangerous idea? Well, I would suggest to you that we are all in some sense afraid of gender. If we think of gender as a set of norms that communicate expectations about how we should emerge into the world, what bodily form we should take or assume, how we are to comport ourselves, then there is good reason to worry that we might fail at the task required. Who sets the rules for becoming a gender, and what freedom is there to change them? Gender, conceived as a normative organization of social reality, is also communicated as a set of demands or expectations.
A normative organization of social reality. Normative means capitalism. Anytime you hear the term normative, that means norms that uphold capitalism. Gender is conceived as a capitalist organization of social reality. That's what Judith Butler is saying there. Does everyone understand that? Yo, just ask the question, Boss Bully Boy. Just ask the question. What do you got?
And what freedom is there to change them? Gender, conceived as a normative organization of social reality, is also communicated as a set of demands or expectations with the understanding that certain very painful consequences may follow if one fails to conform. Imprisonment, pathologization, the deprivation of shelter, excommunication from the family or a religious community, living without health care. So some might fear gender as one would fear any set of norms and possible punishments, but there is also something intimate about gender. It's a way bodies are.
Does anyone know their constitution for justifying that naming something doesn't make it true? Well, they're saying you imagined it into reality, and if you imagine something into reality, is it even real? They're saying that capitalism created these artificial categories to try to force people into these categories. So, I mean, you could argue, as I think what you're doing is, you could argue that via the creation of the categories, you've created something that's real. But what they're saying is, no, bro, you just made this up. And so basically they're saying, you know what they're doing, Boss Bully Boy? They're basically doing what conservatives do when they refuse to use someone's pronouns. They're saying, you just made this shit up. We don't have to buy into it. So like if she says making up male and female categories doesn't make such a thing exist, how do they prove that idea? They don't have to prove it. They don't have you don't have to prove that something doesn't exist. The burden of proof falls upon the person saying this thing is real. So actually what she would say is, I don't need to prove shit. You are the one that needs to prove they're real. And because most people don't take the time to understand what she means when she says gender or man or woman or categories, there's no amount of evidence they can provide her because they aren't going to answer the question that she actually asked. Because they're going to go off on some conservative, like, well, this is biological reality and blah, 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 blah. That's not what Judith Butler said, though. Judith Butler's not talking about biological reality. Judith Butler is talking about a category created by capitalism. And so when conservatives are like, this is just biology and blah, 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 they can do that. That's not the question that she asked. Does that make sense?
Organized, but it's also a way that they conduct themselves in relation to one another. It is this body, after all, material and singular, that is at once socially formed and acting with, against, and beyond those received norms. Yet others, doubtless mindful of this intimate terrain, long for a set of stable structures, ones that do not change in time. They want, perhaps, an identity fixed by either natural or symbolic law or by the state itself. They fear the variability of gender, not only the different ways that men and women now act, but the apparent fact that the categories change meaning in time, that those assigned female at birth can become men, that those assigned male at birth can become women, that intersexed people are demanding recognition for their embodied lives, and that some people live outside the binary category.
This would have been better formed as a question. What you should have asked is, does she actually believe what she's saying? That would have been a better strategy. To the chat, because obviously I'm not being listened to. Does Judith Butler believe what she is saying? 1 in the chat if Judith Butler absolutely believes what she's saying. 2 in the chat if Judith Butler knows that this is all bullshit. We're going to let other people answer this now because you're not listening to me. 1, they 100% believe it. They 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 believe it. Believe. They believe every single thing that they say. It is only conservatives who do not understand what's going on. The left believes every single thing that they say. The only people who don't get this are people on the right. And by the way, the reason that people on the right believe that the left does not believe in what they say is because the right has no values. The right has no things, no principles that they grasp onto above all else. The right changes with the wind. They change based on whatever their fucking influencers are saying. They believe in free speech 1 minute. They don't believe in free speech the next minute. They dislike spending 1 minute and they like spending when it comes to Thomas Massie, and they're now calling Thomas Massie a Democrat. Like the right has no values and no principles, and that's why they don't understand that the left 100% believes every single thing that they say. Everything. Thank you.
Categories of man and woman, either in new categories as non-binary or in the interstices among existing categories. Those who are unsettled by the variability of gender, its different configurations, are especially vulnerable to those politicians who insist that gender is an ideology and, together with other forms.
Yeah, conservatives are all out buying Teslas. Well, they made fun of Democrats for years for buying Teslas and like these electric vehicles. They made fun of them for years and years. Now every conservative is buying a Tesla. It's like, you know, buy a Tesla or not, I don't really care either way. Teslas, a lot of people like them. They're kind of cool cars. I mean, I like the self-driving thing. Whatever. I don't have anything personally against Teslas. I just think it's funny that all of a sudden conservatives are in favor of all this stuff when they weren't in favor of it for a very long time. Yeah, it's hard to believe they do, but they have no doubt they do. The extent that they will deconstruct everything to prove their point, yes, they will. This is very real.
Forms of wokeism are responsible for the destruction of the family, civilization, man, and national cultures.
Literally true, Judith.
I would suggest that the anti-gender political discourse heightens the ordinary anxiety that people have about gender, associating and conflating that regular anxiety with a generalized fear about the future of the world itself, its climate, the increasing precarity of work, the intensification of wealth among the very few.
So do they believe that language creates ideas of reality but don't well, you're trying to backhandedly own them when what you don't seem to realize is they speak a completely different language than you do. Do they believe that language creates ideas of reality? Yes, they do. What you didn't ask is, do they speak the same language I do? No, they don't. Judith Butler's not speaking English right now. Judith Butler is speaking socialist. It is a completely different language with completely different definitions. What you think the words that Judith Butler is saying mean does not mean the same thing to her. Judith Butler has a completely different set of definitions for every single word that she's using than you have. So do they believe that language creates reality? Yeah, you're goddamn right they do. They believe it so much they literally invented their own language that you don't understand. And this is why we do this. Because if you watch them and you listen to them, you will understand their language. It takes time. Just like learning French, how to speak French takes time. Learning how to speak Chinese takes time. Learning how to speak Russian takes time. Learning how to speak socialist takes time. So if you want to understand them, you need to listen to them some more, and we'll help you, and you can ask questions and all that stuff too. And they think that their language and ideas are the only thing that matters. They do not care about your definitions. If you go to them and say, actually, Judith, that is not the correct definition of a woman, Judith Butler's going to say, well, I don't care. I'm going to use my definition of a woman. I'm going to use my definition of what this is. Because Judith Butler, they're winning. They're winning massively. They're winning and we're losing. And so we are in no position to demand that they use our definitions. And if we try to demand that they use our definitions, they're going to laugh at us and keep doing whatever the fuck they want to do. I don't remember what her doctorate is in, but she's a gender studies person. I don't remember. Deconstructing language and meaning is a major vein of postmodernism. Yep. This is why everything is everything is a social construct because it was created by capitalism. Does the language used change perception? It changes both. Well, okay. Upwards of 44% of high school students think that they're queer. Upwards of 40% of high school students today believe that they are queer, gender fluid, gender non-binary. So does the language used change perception and reality? Yeah, it changes perception and reality. You're trying to say it just changes their perception, it doesn't change reality. It is reality that upwards of 40% of high school students believe that they are non-binary or genderqueer or gender non-conforming because of the things that Judith Butler created. So perception is reality. You might not like it because you are on the losing end of it. They are winning. They are creating the world that we live in. They are creating an entire generation in their image. And you guys are going, no, this isn't happening. We can't see it. It's not real. It's not real. It's not real. It's not real. It is real. It's happening right in front of you. It's happening right now. I tell people on the right this was going on for years and they didn't believe it and they thought it would never fly in the real world. Yes, they did, Dan. 100%. 100%. They still don't want to hear it. And listen, for people who are new, like you might feel like I'm being too hard on you. You have to understand that there is a level of cognitive dissonance for people who don't want to believe this, and a lot of people like who just find my content for the first time. They're like, "You're such a bitch." No, I'm being nicer to you than anyone on your side has ever been. The reason that I'm being nicer to you than anyone on your side has ever been is because I'm telling you the truth. I'm telling you the truth and the facts of the situation, and I'm showing you the evidence. And I'm taking the time to walk you through it. What I'm also trying to do is to slap you in the head and get you to overcome the cognitive dissonance that your brain is going through because you don't want to believe this is true. You don't want to believe that they're winning. You don't want to believe that this is happening right now. You don't want to believe that it requires more than saying they don't know what a woman is to defeat this problem. So you might think I'm mean because you don't want to believe what I'm showing you, but you know it's real because you're watching the video of it literally right now. And I will keep smacking you in the face until you acknowledge that this is real. And some of you are going to run away. You're going, she's the biggest bitch on the internet. I've been doing this for years. I know exactly how this goes. If you don't want the truth, if you want to run away and hide your head in the sand and pretend this isn't happening, that's your business. But if you stay here, you will admit at some point that this is real. Thank you, Suzanne, for the super chat. Just want to say thanks for putting this out there and teaching, explaining it all. You're welcome, Suzanne. I appreciate you. We still got like an hour to go.
The open-ended character of brutal wars, the challenges to the homogeneity of national and local cultures posed by migration and forcible displacement. There are, of course, many reasons to fear. Trump is one of them. But gender is not the cause of any of those conditions that have given rise to a generalized concern about the future of the world. To those who think that gender or gender studies is a form of indoctrination, the response should be firm. Gender is neither an ideology nor a form of indoctrination.
It is actually.
Indeed,
Judith,
the critique of gender within gender studies is usually productive. If anything, gender is a framework that allows us to ask, among other questions.
Carlin, it's been a long time since we played the Penguin song. Can we watch it again? I'll tell you what, Trendlin. I'll tell you what. Right now, I have $25 in super chats. You know, it's a Thursday. It's a light day. Whatever. If we get to the goal, if we hit the super chat goal, then we can listen to the song. Alternatively, if you guys want to start a bidding war amongst yourselves between the, actually, you know what? Let's do that. Let's do that. Let's do that. We're going to do a bidding war. And we're going to start at 0. And so, oh, actually, hang on. I'm going to make a new banner for this. Create banner. Pro Penguin song 0. Actually, no. Pro Penguin song is now 10. Trendle and Super Chat counts as a Pro Penguin song. Anti-Penguin song 0. And we're going to do a bidding war. And whoever sends in the most Super Chats wins. So if you want to hear this, okay, so Nick is already saying now we've got a $5 Super Chat against the Penguin song. If you guys don't know what the Penguin song is, I guess maybe you'll find out today, maybe you won't. It all depends on who wins the bidding war. Oh, come on. Save. There we go. It is, the Penguin song is, it is a delight. It is a delight. Well, if the new people want to know what the Penguin song is, then they can donate to the Pro Penguin Song cause. Listen, you guys can work this self out in the chat. You guys can work this out amongst yourselves in the chat. You guys can campaign for either Pro Penguin Song or Anti Penguin Song. Boss Bully Boy says, because she's making this for an audience, we need to remember that a lot of what she says is perspective. No, we don't use the term praxis. We are killing off the term praxis. No one knows what praxis means. There's like James Lindsay tried to make praxis happen for like 2 years. It never happened. We are killing off that term. And Boss Bully Boy, let me know if you're pro Penguin song or anti Penguin song, and I will add it to the appropriate chat. Pro Penguin from Renan. See, I've created a monster now. Creating a monster. That's all right. Bot, are you pro Penguin? Okay, let's keep going. You guys can send in your chats.
How is the social world organized? Through what exclusions and with what potentials? The debates on such questions are open-ended. For those who have learned from the field, that openness is a promising value to be affirmed. For others, social structure should remain unchanging and based on pre-social differences that can be known apart from any interpretive framework or social meanings. The irony is that those who seek to censor books on gender or to close down the teaching of gender studies are themselves
Elena just owed you guys so bad. Average person also chipped in. I have to do math now. Oh shit. Okay, we're just gonna say what is 75 pounds in dollars? Hang on. What is 75 pounds in dollars? I need to do the math. What is 75 pounds in dollars? It's basically $100. Elena just gave us $100. Bruh. So we got I mean the anti-penguin song people gotta pick it up is all I have to say. So we got Trendolin sent in another $10 for the penguin song. Okay, so we got $115 more dollars for the pro penguin side. So that's gonna be $137 for the pro penguin side and only $5 for the anti-penguin side. All right, well, the anti-penguin people, we are going to be watching the penguin song unless the anti-penguin people rally. You guys got plenty of time. We got like almost an hour, okay?
A doctrine on research and teaching. They are saying, you may not think that way. They are saying, we are closing your mind. We have the right to close your mind.
Thank you.
In addition, shutting down open debate in public life and open inquiry in the academy does not bode well for democracy and its claims of free expression and open debate. And yet, this is precisely what the anti-gender ideology movement calls for. It is a campaign of falsification and censorship that strengthens repressive state powers. We need to understand how the intensified opposition to gender fits within the emerging of authoritarian regimes that now gain support through the fantasy of restoring patriarchal and heteronormative orders. As I mentioned earlier, gender does not only characterize identities, it's a framework for understanding a major form of power in society, the way it established separate spheres and social inequalities and exclusions. It includes the analysis of gender-based violence or gender differences in healthcare research or rethinking equality, justice, and freedom. Gendered frameworks have proven to be productive in ecological politics, consider ecofeminism, but also anti-violence policies. Gender policy, gender politics, as it relates to feminism, to gay, lesbian, trans, non-binary, intersex lives, all of these are lives that are seeking greater freedoms, greater equality, less pathologization, and they are contesting discourses and policies that have kept them, though all the people named by those categories, from flourishing. So I would suggest to you that right-wing nationalist movements that incite hatred against migrants and trans people alike are calling for a return to or a protection of national cultures that very often depend on white supremacy, the heteronormative family, and in the case of Orban, it is explicitly miscegenation, which threatens.
Wait, did Judith Butler just say the nuclear family was heteronormative?
That have kept them,
or
though
not
all
normative,
the people
but
named by those
nationalism.
categories, from flourishing.
Listen.
So I would suggest to you that right-wing nationalist movements that incite hatred against migrants and trans people alike are calling for a return to or a protection of national cultures that very often depend on white supremacy, the heteronormative family, and in the case of Orban, it is explicitly miscegenation.
Judith Butler just said that the nuclear family is a nationalist, is a function of nationalism. The nuclear family reproduces nationalism. She's saying that, I mean, it was basically the same as saying, like, she was saying, like, being, like, in favor of the nuclear family would also be anti-immigrant, too, I think. Let's listen again.
From flourishing. So I would suggest to you that right-wing nationalist movements that incite hatred against migrants and trans people alike are calling for a return to or a protection of national cultures that very often depend on white supremacy, the heteronormative family, and in the case of Orban, it is explicitly miscegenation, which threatens the purity of the nation. Authoritarian.
She's basically saying you are literally a Nazi if you want to uphold the nuclear family.
Regimes have increasingly concocted a gender scare as a way of deflecting from the historical conditions of economic, ecological, and social instability and destruction. The ravages of increasingly deregulated capitalism remain deflected by such arguments. They are protected from critical examination, and socialist alternatives are either reduced to their neoliberal variant or quickly associated with the worst histories of state Marxism.
What? Did Judith Butler just basically admit that this is all about socialism?
As a way of deflecting from the historical conditions of economic, ecological, and social instability and destruction. The ravages of increasingly deregulated capitalism remain deflected by such arguments. They are protected from critical examination, and socialist alternatives are either reduced to their neoliberal variant or quickly associated with the worst histories of state Marxism.
Judith Butler comes out as a socialist! We already knew she was a socialist. Obviously, she was a socialist. She's a gender nihilist. Of course she is. I don't know how much more of a confession. She's like, I'm providing socialist alternatives, and you guys just keep pointing out that real socialism has never been tried, and you keep pointing out that 100 million people in the world have died as a result of communism, and I just don't think all socialism is the same. Okay, you're just pointing out that it just hasn't worked yet. We gotta watch that. That was a great surprise clip.
And social instability and destruction. The ravages of increasingly deregulated capitalism remain deflected by such arguments. They are protected from critical examination, and socialist alternatives are either reduced to their neoliberal variant or quickly associated with the worst histories of state Marxism. The arguments against gender are very similar to those used to oppose the study of post-colonial theory in Germany or critical race theory in the UK. All of this happens without serious consideration of any actual texts in the field or what the field seeks to do within the context of the university. Again, a reductive caricature substitutes for a nuanced field of study that constitutes but one set of perspectives within the indispensable fields of race and colonial studies. When authoritarians promise a return to an impossible time, the restoration of order, the defense of the nation, they stoke a furious nostalgia among those who have no better way to understand what is it that is undermining their sense of a durable and livable life. We find this in the discourse of the AfD in Germany, the Fratelli d'Italia, Bolsonaro's followers in Brazil, Trump, Orban, and Putin, Erdogan, the Christian nationalism of Korea and Taiwan. But we also see the anti-gender animus among centrists who recruit support from the right wing in order to stay in power. I would suggest to you...
by centrist, she means Democrats, by the way.
That we are, of course, right to defend gender, to try to show that they have a mistaken understanding, to correct the falsehoods that are being circulated. That's very important, and those of us in academic life have a public responsibility to explain what gender is and is not, and the various views of gender, since there is no one idea of gender. But for any alternative to authoritarianism to emerge, it has to address the fears about the future that many people live with. And we need to make clear that gender is not something to be feared, and it is not the source of instability or fearful ideation in our world. It should not be. We have to offer an alternative vision. It would be collectively wrought. It would have to oppose rights stripping, eliminationist politics, and dispossession. It would have to stand in alliance with migrants, with trans people, with all sorts of people who are having their rights stripped away, who are candidates for elimination, the people of Gaza for sure, the dispossession of native peoples from their land. And it would be important to stand against all forms of violence, especially legal and state violence, and to affirm the radical equality value and interdependency of life. I've suggested today that queer theory is less concerned with identity than with alliance, departing or deviating from constraining norms to build a different kind of future. But to build that future, we will need a radically new imagination. And the imagination we require will not be populated by toxic phantasms, brutal caricatures that reduce and degrade vulnerable communities. No, it will be a counter-imaginary for our times that would oppose the eliminationist dimension of fascist passions, and it would regard lives, all lives, as grievable, that is to say, as worthy of living and worthy of support and infrastructure for life. I would also remind us, though I can't talk about it now, that fascism is with us now, and it shows us the relationship between systemic inequality and eliminationism. It rests on the principle that some lives should be abandoned or eliminated and others extolled as most worthy. But we must insist, in my view, that all life is equally valuable, and the all of all life implies universalizability. The equal of equally valuable implies radical equality. To live a life means to live a life in freedom, one that is shared with others and that constitutes one essential feature of our shared lives. And finally, let's remember that as humans, we are human animals. We are related to animals, we are animals, and we belong to the earth. And this reminds us of interrelational forms that life invariably takes. It's one reason why identity as a category might separate us from others and from our relationships. But interdependency and interrelationality is characteristic of life itself. It's an ecological notion. It's also a queer one. For I am not just this identity, because who I am is nothing without the relationships which make my life possible and which give my life its sense. For me, interdependence and interrelationality are also queer values. Thank you very much.
Okay. It looks like we're moving into the Q&A. Should we just do the Penguin song now as a breather? Because there are some people here who haven't seen the Penguin song. Obviously, the Penguin song is winning the contest. I don't see any rallying for the anti-Penguin song. Like, Elena put a stop to that. So should we just take a brief kind of break to kind of like stretch and do the Penguin song? All right. 1 in the chat if you have seen the Penguin song before. 2 in the chat if you have not seen the Penguin song before. The Penguin song, for people who are unfamiliar, is a song from an organization called Amaze.org. Amaze.org creates cartoons that get shown to middle school and elementary school students in schools all over the country that teaches them about sex and trans and queer and all this stuff. And the Penguin song is one of the most popular videos that Amaze.org has. The Penguin song teaches kids how to be queer and non-binary and trans, and teaches them that if they embrace their queer and non-binary and trans self, they will get more attention and get more likes on social media. So we're going to take a moment, and I'm going to pop myself off the screen, and you guys are just going to enjoy this in the way it was meant.
No matter how you're born, we each have the style. I'll tell you in a while exactly what I like.
Ariana and Renee, they both are born girls. They go into their changing rooms. Ariana loves twirls. That's not for Renee. Pink will not do. All girls don't wear dresses, they wear pants too. Has Renee lost her mind? What's running through her head? Ariana can fix this, no is what she said.
When you put it on, you do a little groove. You know you've gotta move. That's how you know you've got it right.
This is me, who I am. See me in full colors, me like no other. Originality.
No matter how you're born, we each have the style. I'll tell you in a while exactly what I like.
Bryce and Jason, they both are born boys. They go into their changing rooms. Bryce jumps out with joy. Jason has a different idea. The sweater is where it's at. Bryce has to fix this. Here, try this or that. Wait just 1 second. Don't tell him how to dress. Ariana knows this. Only Jason can express.
This is me, who I am. See me in full colors, me like no other. Originality.
No matter how you're born, we each have the style. I'll tell you in a while exactly what I like.
Darla and Charles, 1 girl and 1 boy. They go into their changing rooms. Charles is feeling coy. Others are thrilled with the look, but Charles is quite unhappy. Let's try this again. Yeah, this is snappy. Some are confused. They just don't understand. Charles, now Charlotte is certain. Ariana's her biggest fan. Some might keep their distance, but others will come around. Come on over, Darla. Show us what you found. Darla had something on, but is not quite convinced. She wants to try again, yet she still gives a wince. Nope, not right either. Why can't she decide? Sometimes it takes time, only she can find her stride. Darla presents an outfit. The new name is Darren. Now everything feels right. The person within he's sharing.
When you put it on, you do a little groove. You know you've gotta move. That's how you know you've got it right.
This is me, who I am. See me in full colors, me like no other.
about Skylar, born a boy or girl, not interested in the girl look, won't give the boy look a whirl. Skylar wants a new path, and it isn't one of those. This is a unique look from Skylar's head to toe.
When you put it on, you do a little groove. You know you've got to move. That's how you know you got it right. This is me, who I am. See me in full color, me like no other. Originality, who I am. See me in full color, it's me like no other. Originality.
And by the way, that was probably funded by USAID. It was probably funded by your tax dollars. Yeah, that is and that song will be in your head for the rest of the day, and you can blame Trendlin for that. Oh yeah. Candace O was just in an episode. I'm just asking questions about the Daily Wire. Maybe we'll watch that tomorrow. Yeah, welcome. Yeah, that's the Penguin song. That is taught to kids, by the way. I'm not making that up. That's taught to kids in elementary and middle school. So if you have kids in school, they've probably seen that video. You just don't know about it. Anyway, now that you've had the palate cleanser of the Penguin song, we're going to go back to Judith Butler. And we're going to see what Judith has to say. You know, I don't know, Sam. Like, I first of all, I don't remember where it was. I had to restart my browser last night. I lost the link, all that stuff. But, like, it's also, like, it's a public YouTube thing. So we can find the public YouTube video. So there's, like, no, I'm not feeling a tremendous need to, like, put myself through that set of misery today after the Judith Butler presentation. You got the link? Okay, well, let's just save it then. Let's just save it and let's, like, take a look at it. I appreciate you saving that, though, because I lost it. And I was trying to find it earlier, but I lost it. Anyway, let's just keep going with this.
Thank you so much, Professor Butler, for that really amazing lecture. And we're really grateful for your insights. So we've actually prepared a few questions to begin our Q&A session, and some of which you already talked about briefly, so please feel free to address them selectively. And then we will open up the floor to questions from our audience. So just to start, our first question is, have you observed any new conditions in the field of gender study with social movements potential? And could you help the audience list out a few major theoretical updates to your initial position since gender trouble based on these new conditions and dialogues with other scholars? And also, could you discuss any unexpected reflections, interpretations, or application of your work?
Well, first of all, let's remember that Gender Trouble was published more than 35 years ago. And of course, I wrote it, 38 years ago. It took a while back then to finish the book and have it be reviewed and published and all that. So
Still does.
I would say I wrote it in 1987, 88, which is a very long time ago. And there were some problems with that book. My sentences were long and complex. My references were European, mainly French, although some of the politics was US, but it belonged to a Euro-Atlantic Anglosphere. And I think that I was not taking into account different ways of thinking about gender in different languages. And I was not yet thinking that I had an audience to whom I had to speak in relatively clear ways. I think it has been helpful to me to read feminist work in the biological sciences.
Thanks, average person.
I've read a fair amount now in genetics and hormones, and I understand better how to understand the criticism that gender denies biological reality or gender denies material bodies. I think gender doesn't have to do that. And I've learned a lot both from materialists and from feminist and queer work in the biological sciences. I would also
Feminist
say
and queer work in the biological sciences.
that although
Okay, Judith.
I did insist that that queer was a term of alliance rather than identity fairly early in my career, I didn't understand the importance of transnational alliances, which I now
What?
very deeply affirm. I think the success of Ni Una Menos and other feminist queer movements has shown me how important the arts are, but also transnational alliances and multilingualism and the practice of translation, all of which I try to think about in my most recent work, Who's Afraid of Gender? I think that if queer is really truly going to be a term of alliance, we need to ally with migrants, with racial injustice, with ecological politics that seek to reverse the devastation that has happened to the earth. And I think we also need to be part of anti-capitalist campaigns and anti-carceral campaigns.
Yo!
So
I knew that clip was coming because Stony Baloney said it to us earlier, but I'm still like, it's honestly, this was 11 days ago. It is honestly shocking to me to hear Judith Butler say the quiet part just so overtly. So what Judith Butler is about to say is, this is like the Queers for Palestine thing. Okay? If you don't understand Queers for Palestine, the reason that Queers for Palestine exists is because they believe that the Palestinian uprising is a decolonization uprising to overthrow the capitalist oppressors. The capitalist oppressors are Israel in this case. They came and stole the collectivized land from the Palestinians and privatized it and put the Palestinians in an open air concentration camp and all that. So they believe that that the Palestinians are uprising against their capitalist overlords. That's why they're so excited about free Palestine, free Palestine, free Palestine. Queers are trying to overthrow capitalism. So when they're saying Queers for Palestine, they're saying queers are in solidarity with other anti-capitalist struggles like the Palestinians. You're about to hear Judith Butler give a whole list of other activist movements that might seem unrelated to queer, but they're all related because they're all anti-capitalist ideology. This is where the term "we are not free until everyone is free" comes from. They believe if I am oppressed under capitalism, then you are oppressed under capitalism. If you are oppressed under capitalism, then I am oppressed under capitalism. We will only be free when capitalism is abolished on a global scale.
I think that if queer is really truly going to be a term of alliance, we need to ally with migrants, with racial injustice, with ecological politics that seek to reverse the devastation that has happened.
No. This is like the last time I'm going to warn you. You need to start phrasing things in the form of a question. Because every time you make a statement, it's not being correct. This is not an oppressor victim mentality. That is a conservative bullshit narrative. They believe that capitalism oppresses everyone. They even believe that capitalism oppresses the people that are the so-called oppressors, and they just don't know it because they haven't become aware of they haven't developed their class consciousness. This is not a victim mentality. This is a very specific worldview. In fact, it's the opposite of a victim mentality because they're literally telling the people who you are calling the victims to overthrow the people victimizing them. They're calling for a dictatorship of the proletariat. That's not a victim stance. That's actually an aggressor stance. Let's listen again.
And the practice of translation, all of which I try to think about in my most recent work, Who's Afraid of Gender? I think that if queer is really truly going to be a term of alliance, we need to ally with migrants, with racial injustice, with ecological politics that seek to reverse the devastation that has happened to the earth. And I think we also need to be part of anti-capitalist campaigns and anti-carceral campaigns. So, there's a phrase, queers are everywhere. They must be everywhere because we're not just a community that cuts itself off from other progressive and emancipatory movements. We need to be in them all and of them all, and also learning from them and revising our views. Anyway, I hope that answers your question.
Could all the views be coming from the right side talking about it? I don't understand your question. Could all the views be coming from the right side talking about it? You think there's no one in favor of this? You think that the only people watching this stuff are conservatives? Well, then why is it that 40% of high school kids think that they're trans or non-binary or gender non-conforming? That doesn't make sense. No. These people are winning. These people control the public schools. These people control higher education. These people control media. They are winning. The idea that all the views are just coming from the right is absurd. I'm sorry. Hey, a question. I appreciate that. So you're saying this is the classic Marxist yes and no. Yes and no. The reason I say yes is queer at its core is an anti-capitalist ideology. It is Marxism. It is at the core of Marxism, which is the abolition of private property. Queer wants the annihilation of capitalism. Everything they do is about the annihilation of capitalism. There is a difference between Marxism when it's applied to economic issues and Marxism when it's applied to social issues. To the left, capitalism is not just an economic system. Capitalism is also a social or cultural system. They believe that capitalism is what created and upholds the U.S. government. They believe that the U.S. is a capitalist constitution. They believe the nuclear family is a capitalist family. It's a capitalist construct. They believe gender is created by capitalism. So is it, and I mean, Marx did talk about the nuclear family in the Communist Manifesto and abolishing the family, but is this pure Marxism in that it's about like the economic system seizing the means of production? It's a variant of that. What happened is we call it gain of function Marxism, which is basically this idea that you have Marxism at the core of what this is. This is about the bourgeois versus the proletariat, class consciousness, becoming aware to the hierarchies that exist in society, because if you are aware of the hierarchies that exist, you can work to eliminate the hierarchies. That core of Marxism is still there. At some point, and I would argue that happened in the 70s, in the punk movement, at some point, the strain of Marxism mutated into something else. There was some new factor introduced. So it's like in the movie Contagion, where Contagion is about a world plague, and at the beginning of Contagion, basically a bat shits on a pig, and then the pig gets taken to the slaughterhouse, and the pig gets cooked, and the new world plague emerges as a result of the new contamination that happened with the bat shitting on the pig. This is gain of function, okay? You have a virus that typically worked one way. That's Marxism. Something new gets introduced, which is essentially queer, I think, is an anti-capitalist ideology, or this idea that this is a cultural model. That idea gets introduced, and all of a sudden, you've got some new crazy thing over here that at its core is Marxism, but it's not. It's a new manifestation of it. This is why we call it gain of function Marxism. This is why you can't read Marxist theory and understand queer theory. They're two different things. You have to listen, and also there's a whole subculture movement around queer that only exists in like these underground worlds. They have their own propaganda. We collect a lot of this stuff. They have all their own culture, okay? So it's a different thing. I'm just referring to what I learned in my economics degree. No. That's what I'm trying to explain to you. Capitalism to the left is not just an economic model. Capitalism to the left is a social and cultural model. So everything that you learned in your economics degree, I'm sure it was pretty great. It's not the same thing as this. This is a mutated version of Marxism. So has Marxism at its core, but it's also gone off and has manifested its own weird culture. And it's that culture that is taking over everything. Hope that makes sense. It's just a class revolution, but instead of economics classes, it's gender and sex classes. Well, at its core, it's about the elimination of hierarchy. So capitalism creates all hierarchy. The goal of Marxism is to eliminate all hierarchy. That's what we're talking about. We're just talking about it in different ways. My other question is, what can we do about it? What you need to do about it is you need to learn as much as you can. This is the answer that you guys don't like, because you don't like putting effort into things. Here is the only thing that you can do to help stop this. You need to learn as much as you can about this ideology from the actual people who are implementing it, which is what we're doing right now. You need to learn how to speak their language. You need to become fluent in it. You need to learn how to explain it to other people as simply and clearly as you can. You need to learn how to use primary source evidence like this to show other people what's going on and help them understand it. And then you need to go out and teach other people. So this is not a quick fix solution. Trump is going to issue no executive orders that are going to stop this. There are no laws that are going to be passed in Congress that are going to stop this. There's no Supreme Court decision that's going to stop this. This is a cultural problem. Everything you do politically is downstream from this. And until people start understanding this on a cultural level and deeply, then there's nothing you can do. So if you want to take the time to learn to understand it, we will help you do that. I have resources to help you do that. I can walk you through all the clips. I can show you this. We will help you learn the language, but you have to be willing to show up and sit down and listen and learn. And if you're not willing to do that, then there is literally nothing that I can give you to do, because nothing you do is going to matter. The biggest challenge that conservatives have is they have no idea who the real enemy is. They have no idea. So conservatives spend all their time fighting this enemy over here, and in the meantime, Judith Butler and queer theory is over here. But conservatives are reading about trans people and grooming and pedophilia over here, which has nothing to do with what we're talking about. Well, conservatives are reading about the pedophiles, the pedophiles, the pedophiles. Judith Butler's just over here continuing to make progress. So when I say you need to learn who the real enemy is. You need to learn what the real enemy thinks, because otherwise you're just fucking around over here and you feel like you're doing something because you're reading about pedophilia on the internet. You feel like you're doing something, but you're actually not, because the problem we're actually fighting is over here. I know that's a long way of explaining it, but how do you convince someone who's as indoctrinated as Judith? You don't. That's not our goal. We are never going to change. Judith Butler's in a cult. Judith Butler is not only in a cult, Judith Butler is a high priestess in a cult. You're not going to change her mind. The only thing you can do is to teach other people what's going on that haven't been indoctrinated into the cult yet. All right, let's keep going.
Yes, definitely. Thank you, Professor Butler. That was a very insightful answer. And our second question is that, as such a founding figure of queer theory, to what degree are you informed or interested?
There's a reason that my show is called The Cult. It's because these people are a fucking cult. It's not because I'm actually running a cult, although we do make fun of that. But these people are running a cult. You cannot pull people out of a cult that they have been brainwashed into. But you can try to prevent that cult from taking over the rest of society.
In queer theory development in East Asia or China region, and what advice would you offer to young scholars, especially East Asian scholars aspiring to contribute to this field, and also what do you look forward to seeing in terms of the evolution of queer theory?
Yes. Well, I have to say that in the last 15 years, I've probably had 10 dissertation students who work on queer Asian studies, and some of it is more Asian American, some of it is East Asian, some of it is distinctively from China or from Hong Kong. But I have a wide number of graduate students at the University of California, Berkeley, who work in that area and who've certainly taught me about that. So I am interested. I visited Beijing and Shanghai. I met with queer activists and artists in Shanghai, and I learned a great deal from them about negotiating censorship and also about how to keep solidarity and networks open and active under conditions of censorship. I've also learned a great deal about Christian nationalism and how the missionary movements have affected politics in South Korea and in Taiwan. I've also visited Japan and saw how difficult it is to fight patriarchy and homophobia even in the liberal progressive domains. So I've been very lucky to establish some important contacts and to learn about the kinds of movements and scholarship that's happening in several parts of East Asia. Oh, and Southeast Asia, I should say. I have a wonderful student who works on Vietnam.
Thank you, Professor Butler. We really appreciate this perspective. And our third question is that considering the majority's relative comfort with their assigned sex, how can we really elevate queer issues to become a priority in the mainstream discourse?
Well, I think, first of all, it's interesting to talk to people about their comfort with their assigned sex because, of course, many people are quite comfortable with the sex that they've been assigned. But if we take seriously the idea that sex is assigned and then you emerge into the world either with the sense like, that's a good assignment, I like this assignment, I'm staying with this assignment works for me, I can express myself, I move in the world, I feel recognized by the assignment, it's all good. Even for people who feel that way, they should be able to hear that for others, being assigned a sex and then trying to live out life within those terms is not possible. It's enormous suffering, and it actually does damage to the person who's trying to fit that category. So I think we need to accept the idea that there are at least two dimensions to sex assignment. There's the moment you're assigned, and then there's that fact that we are assigned all the time. We are interpolated. We move into social, institutional, legal settings where people tell us what our sex is, or they address us as if we are a certain sex, or as if we are embodying a certain idea of sex. So there's always been that discrepancy between the original moment of assignment and then how that category is lived, whether it's lived well, happily, whether it's lived unwell, whether it has to be shifted, changed, redefined in order for life to be livable, whether it has to be moved out of the way and refused in the name of another category for life to become possible. It just seems that we need to give cisgendered people a way to understand their happiness, right? It's like, for you,
What?
that's how you lived it. Other people find it unlivable, or other people had to change it. It seems to me we have to accept, though, that there's always that question. How is it that you live your sex assignment? The answer might be fine. But the fact is, there is this difference between the assignment and the question, how will it be lived? And once we get people to understand that divergence, that dual dimension of sex assignment, it seems to me that they'll be better equipped to affirm the decisions that some people have to make in relation to original sex assignment in order to live well.
Thank you. That was really thought-provoking. So our next prepared question is about DEI, and that's actually a nice segue into our audience question because I saw in the chat that several people have also raised this question. So I will just choose from one of the most representative ones, and I will read it out for the sake of time. And this is from Stephanie Wong. I have a question. I'm reading that I have a question as someone who's teaching gender studies in a liberal arts college in upstate New York. And how do we do the challenging work of fighting our academic freedom while at the same time complicating the neoliberal multicultural DEI work? As the current administration catalyzes anti-normative discourse, especially on gender and sexuality, into DEI initiatives.
Hang on. I want to just read this question. We're going to break this apart. How do we do the challenging work of fighting for our academic freedom, that means teaching socialism, while at the same time complicating the neoliberal multicultural DEI work? This is like not in favor or complementary of DEI work, because DEI was never the foundation of what the far left was doing. It was just a distraction that conservatives bought hook, line, and sinker. As the current administration ghettoizes anti-normative discourse, that means queer discourse, especially on gender and sexuality, into so-called DEI initiatives. So now this person is saying DEI doesn't even have anything to do with us. And they probably do believe that, because DEI fundamentally is about the categorization of people. It's about identity politics. These people are not in favor of identity politics. They've never been in favor of identity politics. So this person is calling DEI a neoliberal identity politics initiative. They're saying we need to complicate. This is not good. And now she's pissed off at the end because she's like, they're perverting our amazing gender ideology and they're calling it DEI. We don't even believe in this shit.
Well, I think we have to do two things at once, maybe three. One is continue doing the best teaching we can do. In other words, within the classroom, we need to have the text, the film, the whatever object it is we are studying. We need that common material. We need to teach people how to read and read carefully and to think critically.
Yeah,
and to
this
think.
is, I mean, okay. So for people who for the people who asked me what do I do earlier, and I said you need to sit down and learn, even though that's not what you're going to want to hear. I actually meant to display this one. No offense. So for the people who were like, "What do we do, Carlin?" and I said, "Sit down and learn." When I said, "You think the enemy you're fighting is over here, but the enemy you're fighting is really over here. The enemy you think you're fighting are the liberals and the Democrats. The real enemy are the radical revolutionary far left. The liberals and the Democrats and progressives are not the same in any way as the radical revolutionary far left. These are two different groups. The radical revolutionary far left hates the liberals and the Democrats more than conservatives. And I'm very sorry, Mao has nothing to do with this. Most socialists in the United States denounce Mao. They denounce Stalin. They are Marxist-Leninists. People who say this is Maoism with American characteristics are lying, and you should stop listening to them. And the reason I say that is we have them on video saying that. We literally have them on video saying everything I just said.
Think with imagination, and to find their own point of view and give it the best possible representation. We have an obligation as teachers to provide the best education possible. So I would keep the classroom focused and continue to do the good work that there is to be done in gender, sexuality, women's studies, etc. At the same time, everyone has to ask, what are the conditions under which I am teaching? What are the conditions under which I am speaking extramurally outside the walls of the classroom? What are the conditions under which I'm paid or that secure my appointment, if anything does? Most teachers no longer have tenure, as you know, and that institution is under assault.
That's a shame, Judith. That's a real shame.
There's a question of a political effort to defend the integrity and the importance of gender studies as a field. So even as we are doing the research and teaching inside the field, we have to step out and speak publicly, and to administrators, sometimes to state legislatures, if it's a public university in the US, to donors, to everyone who's making those financial decisions of why this is enormously valuable. Now, the problem emerges, as your question implies, what's the scheme of values that administrators are using? And if it's thoroughly neoliberal, like, how do we even speak to that? It seems to me...
How do we even speak to the neoliberals? We don't even know how to talk to the neoliberals. Neoliberal means Democrat and progressive.
Financial decisions of why this is enormously valuable. Now, the problem emerges, as your question implies, what's the scheme of values that administrators are using? And if it's thoroughly neoliberal, like, how do we even speak to that? It seems to me that we can't translate ourselves into the neoliberal language in order to show our value, because we will always be devalued according to that particular metric. So we need to insist that another set of values be brought to the front, including open inquiry, which defines universities, academic freedom, which defines faculty autonomy over what they teach, and also ideals of democratic open debate that are informed. Because one of the things we are obviously seeing, especially, well, not just in the US, but in Argentina, in Brazil, in Germany, people coming to political decisions or decisions about who's to have rights and who's not, based on caricatures, prejudices, uninformed ideas. So it's extremely important that gender studies be understood as a field, as a discipline that is in favor of open inquiry, that's not about indoctrination, but is actually holding open the idea of open inquiry as a better way of arriving at truth, of informed decisions and informed judgments. I know that probably sounds somewhat liberal, but it's better than neoliberal and maybe more effective in these situations. But we should also be defending unionization efforts and opposing deportation and censorship efforts at colleges and universities, because right now we're being targeted, and it's going to be important both to save our own units, our own disciplines, but also to keep the police and the state from intervening in the important work that we do.
That means the capitalist state, and the police are, of course,
Thank you so
capitalist.
much for your insights on such an important topic. So our next question from the audience is from Ivy Huang. So although transnational queer activism has challenged gender norms globally, some argue that queer theory has been co-opted by colonial structures to reinforce Western ideological dominance. In China, for example, the government has used this argument to justify the marginalization of queer individuals, often framing LGBTQ plus rights as a Western imposition. So how can queer individuals and communities navigate these intersecting systems of power, such as cis patriarchy, heteropatriarchy, colonialism, and white supremacy?
Yes.
Yo, okay. I can't wait to hear Judith's answer to this question, but can we just talk about this question? When I said earlier that the left has a different language and it sounds like English, but it's not English, this is exactly what I'm talking about. This is the less language in its most pure form. Judith Butler's doing like a watered down version of it where you're getting a keyword here and there, but Judith knows how to present a little bit more colloquially. This is what socialist is in its most pure socialist form. Although transnational queer activism has challenged gender norms globally, some argue queer theory has been co-opted by colonial structures, that means capitalist structures, to reinforce Western ideological dominance. That again is a reference to capitalism, because they're talking about the dominance of private property ownership. In China, the government has used this argument to justify the marginalization of queer individuals, often framing LGBTQ plus rights as Western imposition. Again, we're going to read this as private property ownership because that's really what they're talking about. How can queer individuals and communities navigate these intersecting systems of power? If it's a system of power, it's reinforcing capitalist norms, such as cis heteropatriarchy, which is the basically gendered version of of normativity. So this is cis as in you are not trans, you are cis. Hetero as in, we actually have a clip of them saying that being straight doesn't mean like liking someone of the opposite sex. Being straight is about like embracing normative culture. So again, anytime you hear heteronormativity or homonormativity, it's references to the same thing. It's both capitalism. Patriarchy is the gender hierarchy that capitalism created. Colonialism is the privatization of land as private property under capitalism. White supremacy is a reference to systemic racism. Systemic racism means the system that upholds capitalism. So basically we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Actually, individuals, you can make the argument that individualism is also a form of capitalism because you can't have capitalism without individualism. They hate individualism. They want to get rid of it. So 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. You have at least 9 references to capitalism in this one sentence. It's so socialist. All right, let's listen.
Well, look, there are versions of queer culture that are very media driven and market driven, and we can't control all of that. There's a lot of stuff on television and film that makes queer life into a consumer item or a fascinating spectacle, and that's not in my mind the best representation of what queer studies or queer movements can do. But
she's talking about rainbow capitalism. So queer Marxists are vehemently against rainbow capitalism, which is essentially exploiting the gays and the quote unquote queers to profit under capitalism. So what she's talking about, they're making this into a reality TV show spectacle, and they're selling products, and they're doing pride displays in Target. It's like they're talking about rainbow capitalism, which they actually don't like.
It is a commercialization for sure. But let me say this. If you look at the decolonial work on gender, and one of the things one of the things you will see is that Christian missionaries that have been part of the history of imperialism have imposed ideas of the family and of gender norms on communities in Latin America, in Africa, in India, in Sri Lanka.
Oh yeah? Oh yeah? Christian nationalists impose the idea of the family? Thank you, Joe Marks. I like your name. Thank you for the super sticker. I appreciate it. Let's listen to that again. Tell us, Judith, how Christian nationalists have imposed the idea of family.
And one of the things you will see is that Christian missionaries that have been part of the history of imperialism have imposed ideas of the family and of gender norms on communities in Latin America, in Africa, in India, in Sri Lanka, in a number of East Asian countries where Christian nationalism is also very, very high. So the Christian missionary position is one that has not only enforced the heteronormative family, but also binary gender and women's subordination and the pathologization of gay and lesbian lives and trans lives. So, and the rest of us, the non-binaries among us. And the erasure of intersex people. So it seems to me that queer theory has to be anti-colonial. It actually has to have an anti-colonial commitment, and it has to work in tandem with anti-colonial struggles. The imperialism that has most profoundly affected gender has been the imperialism of Christian nationalism and the imposition of those norms on local cultures that very often have different vernaculars and vocabularies for understanding gender, kinship, family, and the rest. So that's where the critique of imperialism should be. Of course, we all know the U.S. uses feminism to conduct its wars. There's pinkwashing in Israel. We know how state powers can use queer, trans, feminist work to fortify their patriarchal and militarist ventures, as if they're saving us all. And even Trump's order, right? He's going to attack gender ideology in order to save women. It's like, that is a contradiction in terms. Women are a gender. Women is the most important gendered category in the history of gender. There's just no question. But what he's really doing is making sure trans people don't have rights. And he's also saying that cis or women assigned female at birth are to be protected against trans women who are, as you know, very often figured as nefarious men with designs on women. So I think we
have to get that. Oh my God, that was great. We need to go back to Trump's executive order. Okay, I think that's a little bit too far. Okay, I'm going to clip this. I'm going to be clipping a bunch of this stuff, guys, but I actually just want to get this specific clip because that was actually just funny. They're like, Trump, like, women are the most important gender category, and Trump just hates trans people.
The imposition of those norms on local cultures that very often have different vernaculars and vocabularies for understanding gender, kinship, family, and the rest. So that's where the critique of imperialism should be. Of course, we all know the U.S. uses feminism to conduct its wars. There's pinkwashing in Israel. We know how state powers can use queer, trans, feminist work to fortify their patriarchal and militarist ventures, as if they're saving us all. And even Trump's order, right? He's going to attack gender ideology in order to save women. It's like, that is a contradiction in terms. Women are a gender. Women is the most important gendered category in the history of gender. There's just no question. But what he's really doing is making sure trans people don't have rights. And he's also saying that cis or women assigned female at birth are to be protected against trans women who are, as you know, very often figured as nefarious men with designs on women. So I think we need to be really careful when patriarchal imperialists invoke anti-imperialism, or when the church invokes anti-imperialism, when it is itself an imperial power and has done more than anything else to restrict and regulate gender relations in the history of the world.
All right, that's a great clip. Hang on. Thank you, Judith, for all the great clips that you're giving us today. That's a really great one, though. Let's make sure that saves. Come on, clipping tool. Come on. You just did me a solid. Now save the clip. It's so slow. Okay, there it goes. No, you just think that because you're probably a Christian and you're probably focusing in on that. But if she really disliked the church, she would have mentioned it way more than one time in this presentation. She really dislikes gender. Her thing is gender. She probably doesn't give a flying flip about the church. The church is incidental. So, like, just because you care about something doesn't mean they really care about it. They think that religion's going to go away as soon as capitalism is abolished. Good morning, Laura.
Thank you so much.
Or not
for
morning,
insights.
evening. What the hell am I
We
talking
actually
about?
have
Morning.
several different
Good
questions
evening.
related to this. So I will just lump them together and see if you have anything to add. First of all, this is a question from Chiu Meng Sun. So this question is about how can the shared trauma among queer and women and queer communities become a foundation for coalition building and initiate concrete policy change? And another question from Lemony is that what guidance would you offer to those working on the ground, particularly in making queer theories accessible and actionable outside of academia?
Oh, that's a good question. How would you make queer
Well,
theory
first of all,
actionable outside academia?
I don't know if trauma is the basis for solidarity. I guess I would say undergoing trauma and finding solidarity with others who have undergone similar kinds of experiences is extremely important. But what's most important is allowing traumatic material to be transformed, right? To the point where it's not just that I or a singular person can survive a trauma, but where we can produce new conditions of reality where no one has to go through that trauma again, right? So having cultivating a collective desire for a world in which that kind of trauma does not have to be experienced again is the moment in which it becomes political. But we have to perhaps move beyond trauma to repair and understand repair as collective and as also militant, right?
Militant.
A militant response to trauma, not the one that denies it, but also one that takes that material and seeks to transform it. Of course, then it becomes pain and suffering, perhaps, that can be transformed rather than trauma that is paralyzing and that keeps us stuck in the past. So trauma has to give way to pain and suffering, we might say, in order to become available for a reworking and a collective demand to produce a world in which no one has to experience that again. For people on the ground, I think we're all on the ground these days. Some of us have moved between the university and the ground. I think we all have to take the time to explain fundamental things, not in a patronizing way, but in a way that people will understand. And that happens differently in different languages. It's also very hard when you're explaining to family or communities that find words like gender or queer very alien and academic and Western or elitist, maybe breaking it down, translating it into other languages. There's no reason why we have to keep the word gender. We don't. In certain parts of the world, it doesn't work. It's not translatable. So you come up with another way of trying to explain the idea or the aspiration. So I don't think we have to be wedded to the English term gender. I think that is a mistake. We need to accept non-translatability when it emerges and allow gender to fade away in light of new language that reaches people more effectively.
Allow gender to fade away in light of new language that reaches people more effectively. Judith would say, she's like, I'm just talking about translating into a foreign language. You are misconstruing what I'm saying. I'm not saying we allow gender to fade away as a concept. I'm saying we need to adapt the language. That's what she would say. Except that they're literally trying to adapt the language in the United States so that gender fades away. Listen again.
The aspiration. So I don't think we have to be wedded to the English term gender. I think that is a mistake. We need to accept non-translatability when it emerges and allow gender to fade away in light of new language that reaches people more effectively.
Thank you very much. That really gives us a lot to think about. So our next question from the audience is about the possibility of resistance. So this is a question from Xin Yuan. Is that how can individuals cultivate an impactful gender political violence when direct political action is constrained? And are alternative public
Yes, exactly, Pamela. If you abolish gender, then you achieve gender equity. You do not achieve gender equity without abolishing gender. So again, we have that gender hierarchy. The gender hierarchy is called the patriarchy. It's where men are on top, all the money and all the power, women in the home doing the unpaid labor, raising the next generation of proletarian workers in the nuclear family. That's a hierarchy. The only way you get rid of the hierarchy is by getting rid of the socially constructed categories of men and women that capitalism created in the first place. That's when you have equity. Equity is the elimination of the hierarchy. These people believe we have to abolish all gender, non-binary means no binary, in order to achieve equity.
spaces viable means of resistance, and also how does the thinking of temporality opens up possibility of resistance and coalition building in queer activism?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I see some of you, I don't know where everybody is in this meeting today, but when I...
Did you hear me say that? No. 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 Most countries are way worse than we are. Canada's basically socialist. The UK is basically socialist. It's all over the world. It's not just here. I never said it was.
Could see the larger...
I usually only study it here because I'm not studying the entire world. The United States is big enough. I need to listen to the question again. But that's not to say it's not happening everywhere it is.
Well, I mean, I see some of you, I don't know where everybody is in this meeting today, but when I could see the larger panorama, I saw that some of you have animals as your avatar. Some of you just have a name. It may be your name. It may not be your name. It might be a name you use for Zoom, because I don't know where you are in the world or what kind of censorship you might be facing by being on this Zoom meeting. And I've certainly had Zooms with groups in Russia, for instance, where no one could show their face. I mean, Zoom itself is a problem. Do we know what kind of surveillance there is in Zoom? We know there is some. We use it anyway because we need to stay connected. There are ways of eluding the censor on the internet, even though the internet is, as we know, owned increasingly by a few group of people. We can't really connect on.
Would I say California is becoming less captured? No, this is a conservative fantasy. You might be thinking of politics. We're not talking about politics. It doesn't matter if California goes deep red someday. It doesn't matter. The politics do not fix this problem. It doesn't matter if everyone votes Republican. It doesn't matter. You only fix this problem by changing the culture. So is California being recaptured? No, not in any way. Never will be.
Elon Musk platforms anymore without immediately being a candidate for surveillance. But there are other platforms and people are developing new ones. So moving between...
She's saying that Twitter is surveilling people?
Connected. There are ways of eluding the censor on the internet, even though the internet is, as we know, owned increasingly by a few group of people. We can't really connect on the Elon Musk platforms anymore without immediately being a candidate for surveillance. But there are other platforms and people are developing new ones. So moving between platforms, establishing networks online and in person. I think the public gathering or the private gathering of people is extremely important right now, that we can't just be isolated with our screens. We also need to actually meet up. And how you do that, under what conditions, is of course complicated when public assembly is not possible. So where do you go? What are the spaces that are possible? You know those spaces and people can make them periodically and they can shift from space to space.
I never taught you that. I most certainly did not teach you that. I thought the leftists wanted to abolish capitalism in the United States, the final battleground. I don't know. No. Everyone had, like, every single time one of you guys goes and listens to someone else talk about socialism, you always come back with these crazy, absurd ideas. They believe the United States is the most important domino that needs to fall in order to create global socialism. This is not the WEF. This is not the New World Order. It's not the same thing. They just do not believe that socialism can work unless it's a global system. They believe if the United States falls, every other country will fall after that. So no, they do not want to just abolish capitalism in the United States. That's not something they've ever said. They're actually explicitly clear that it is the start of a global Marxist revolution. That is what intifada means. Intifada has nothing to do with anti-Semitism. It has nothing to do with Jews. Don't listen to any influencer who tells you that intifada has anything to do with Jewish nothing. Intifada means worldwide socialist revolution. How do we know that? We literally have communists on video telling us that explicitly in those exact terms.
In order to escape capture or surveillance. It's risky. It's very risky. We also know that shifting your VPN is a queer practice, right? You just go, you travel someplace, you get a different VPN, you come back, you shift your avatar. I saw how this works. I know how this works. But people do find ways of continuing to network, to meet, and to produce their solidarities. And it's so important because the news is very bad, and we all stand a chance of becoming extremely depressed and dispirited and hopeless. But coming together, and I hope this meeting is one such meeting, can be a way of experiencing uplift and regeneration, some new hope, some new plans. We need to share strategies. We need places where we can share strategies. We need to be able to analyze what strategies worked and what did not. But we also need a vision. We need artists and others coming in to give us a new way of imagining the world, because we can't just be fighting against.
Pamela, the U.S. is going to fall in 10 to 15 years, by my estimation. So no, the U.S. is not the hardest to take down at all. It's not. It's going to fall because the right isn't doing anything to prevent it. It's just a matter of time. They just need more time. That's all it is, just more time. But it will fall. Unless something major happens, which I don't think is actually going to happen, but okay.
Against existing powers. We also have to be able to show people the world we want to live in and invite them to live in that world with us. And we have to remember not just to take apart existing power or to critique the falsehoods and caricatures that are so deeply damaging, or to repeal those laws. All that is really important. Radical lawyers have never been more important. At the same time, who's going to give us the vision of the world that we want to live in? And what would be the principles? How would they be embodied?
The right is very confused about why you should be scared. The right is very confused about why that college student they're trying to deport has so many lawyers. There was everyone on Twitter today is like, why does this guy have 19 lawyers? And most of the lawyers are from the ACLU, by the way. So there was this conservative journalist that posted the full list of lawyers for that college kid, and he was like, who's funding this? Why does this kid have 19 lawyers? And if you actually read the list, at least 10 of them were from the ACLU. Or like the New York version of the ACLU. And it was just like, you moron, the ACLU is funding this. Do you want to know why the ACLU is funding this? Because this is an open and flagrant violation of free speech, and it's also happened to a leftist activist. And so the ACLU is absolutely going to win this. I hope people understand this. Like, the Columbia college student is going to kick the Trump administration's ass, and it's not even going to be close. The right has no evidence that this guy committed any crimes. There's nothing. Like, if the right tries to go into court and say he was standing around chanting and beating a drum, he was literally committing a crime, they're going to lose. If his lawyers present the Trump administration's statement where they literally said we're not accusing him of committing any crime, they're going to lose, and they're going to lose big effing time. And so I guess my point is that that Judith Butler says now is the time for radical lawyers. They plan for this stuff. They plan for people to get arrested. They have mutual aid networks. They plan for legal representation. They plan for all of this.
the falsehoods and caricatures that are so deeply damaging, or to repeal those laws. All that is really important. Radical lawyers have never been more important. At the same time, who's going to give us the vision of the world that we want to live in, and what would be the principles? How would they be embodied? What do we know about the world we want to live in? What do we want to say to people when we say no, you don't take the authoritarian offer, you don't take the fascist appeal, you say no to that in favor of, look, this other world, the one we are drawing, painting, filming for you. So I think multimedia strategies, but also transnational alliances, reflecting on strategies that work and don't, but keeping in mind we always have to have that vision that we believe and we can show is more compelling than what's happening on the authoritarian right.
Thank you. That was very powerful, and I'm sure it resonates with a lot of us.
Brave. Stunning and
So
brave.
we have two questions that are related and seems like a follow-up, so I will just ask them two in a row. So this question is from Suri. It's about, you mentioned the new technology, and this is about AI. So how might AI shape our understanding of gender roles and identities, and maybe the future of queer theory? And also the other question is about also pathways of resistance or migration. Also something that you mentioned is that many queer individuals in China once viewed migration as a means of achieving a more livable life. But with the global rise of the right-wing politics, including Trump's election, so migration feels less like a guarantee of safety. So how might queer theory help us rethink political agency and survival when the traditional framework of escaping is not less viable?
Yes, that's a huge question. It's a very good question, and I think we're all trying to think about that. And I'm wondering, like, do I need to migrate? If so, where would I go? I think right now, many people are staying where they are in order to fight where they are, to see what changes can happen, and also to be support for communities of people who are trying to make change, right? So we have to be regenerated as persons at the same time that we fight for changes in the world. So what can we do? Where can we do something best? And also, where will we be safe? I don't know. The shifting terms of safety, it's very hard to say. I know that from the US, people look north at Canada and think maybe they would be better off there, or possibly in Mexico City. And I also think there are parts of Europe that are actually probably more safe than the United States right now, but that might change. You know, you arrive someplace and then suddenly it's changed. It's very hard. It's why the struggle against authoritarianism and the fascist underpinnings of it has to be global in nature. I don't have a good answer for you. AI, right now, I'm trying to live to the side of AI. I know that's impossible. I have a very negative view of it, but I know that there are people who think, oh, it can be used for the purposes of resistance. And my guess is that they're younger than me and they know things that I don't know. So it's a topic that I'm not very good at answering or at addressing, and my apologies about that.
Thank you very much for sharing your perspective. So our next question is more specifically about one of your work. So this is by Tina. So in Violence Mourning Politics, you discuss how certain identities and groups are derealized and dehumanized, rendering them subsumed under power and control. And you also propose mourning as a potential practice for reconfiguring our ties to lost identities. So in the context of globalization, where hybridity and homogenization become increasingly entangled, how do you see the role of queer feminist activism in navigating these complexities and recovering lost cultural connections? And what are some potential acts that we can take to bridge queer theory and cultural studies?
Many questions, all good, all excellent questions. So let me say a few things first about mourning. Well, as you know, there have always been feminist activist groups like Women in Black or the Madres or the Abuelas in Argentina. And they have taken on a kind of traditional role of women as grieving, but what they've done is to deprivatize grief, right? They brought grief into the public.
Deprivatize, you don't
and
say.
They've used the occasion of grief.
Deprivatization means anti-capitalization because capitalism is defined as private property ownership. So when she says deprivatize, she might as well be saying decolonize or liberate or any of the other like anti-capitalist things.
Of women as grieving, but what they've done is to deprivatize grief, right? They brought grief into the public, and they've used the occasion of grieving to indict the state for its violence, whether it's the disappeared, for whom the state is responsible, or it's the wars that have killed so many people in the Balkans and elsewhere. Women in Black, for instance, have documented war damage and devastation, or in some of the activist groups in Japan that I met, feminist queer, who were not only grieving the losses from the atomic bombs in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, but also developing an anti-militarist, anti-violence position that was feminist and queer. So I see that there are these really important groups that are doing this work. But let's remember that grief, public grief, is a way of saying this was a life, or these were lives that should not have been taken, that were unfairly and unjustly taken from the world, from the realm of the living. And in standing for them and remembering them and memorializing them, we are also saying that we want a world in which that does not happen. We want a world that's dedicated to infrastructures that allow people to continue to live and live well. They're dedicated to health and education, to ecology, right? That are life affirming in all of those ways. So very often, public grieving can be a way of making a demand and envisioning a different world. It's not just focusing on the past and who was lost and lamenting, although it is that. But it's also about moving forward. Now, I would also say that public grieving can be a way of making solidarity between the living and the dead. Like, they are still with us, and we are still not only acting with them and for them, but they inspire our action and they are embodied in our action. So in some sense, that's the best way of mourning, which is a ritualized way of keeping the dead alive or keeping the dead present as we move forward to build a different kind of world. I don't know much about cultural studies and feminism and all that. I think there are patriarchal versions of cultural studies I've never really liked. And we have to be really careful of that. Feminism should be at the forefront of that field, and if it's not, something's wrong. But let me just say this. I think we've underestimated the importance of getting angry and even of a certain kind of cultivated rage. So to go back to the practice of public mourning, it can also be a way of gathering, protesting, and expressing rage together collectively in honor of life, not in a destructive way, but in a way that allows rage to become a form of life affirmation. And I think that's complicated, but if we're furious.
Rage is a form of life affirmation. Well, that's really convenient for militant queer activism, Judith. Protesting and rage is a form of life affirmation. Rioting is literally a form of life affirmation. Okay.
In rage. So to go back to the practice of public mourning, it can also be a way of gathering, protesting, and expressing rage together collectively in honor of life, not in a destructive way, but in a way that allows rage to become a form of life affirmation. And I think that's complicated, but if we're furious that people have been destroyed and killed unjustly, then our fury, our rage should also be cultivated into construction so that we don't enter into the cycle of destruction. That's not always easy to do. It's an artful way of life to make your rage productive and life affirming, but it can be done.
Wow, thank you. That gives us a lot to think about.
Stunning and
definitely.
brave and beautiful, Judith.
And our next question from the audience is also related to a very recurring theme of your writing, which is about desire. So this question from Zijing Ye is, how can we escape or reset the structure of desire shaped by the post-media pharmacopornographic age?
Well, I think that that's a really big question. And I think a lot of young people who have been subject to living on the media, right, who live inside the internet and for whom pornography is a primary way of understanding sexuality, who very often find themselves confused by what they've learned and seen and don't know how to translate it out into their lives or how to change that so that they can have a different relationship to sexuality. I don't think we can change our desires through self-reflection and analysis, except to the degree that we can see that something else got a hold of us, a pornography that is violent or that is debasing to women or uh, 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 degrades sexuality itself. What other cultural resources are there? What other kinds of films, what other kinds of photos, what other kinds of stories can we draw from? So I think we need to make ourselves available to different cultural resources that can combat the ones that have been seeking to structure our desire. I don't think any of us are completely determined by cultural material. There's always a disturbance there. Like, oh, this seems to be what I want because that's what I saw. But there's also a question, why do I want this? And this doesn't seem very desirable. What can I do? The disturbance is productive. And it's at that point where you need to go find other kinds of materials, other conversations, other films, other stories that allow us to imagine and to feel in new ways. But I think that's a difficult kind of transformation. Most of us only transform sexuality in the context of relationships that are committed to reciprocity and trust, and equality, and then it seems we find new ways.
Thank you very much for your perspective. And so our next question is about the politics in the United States. So this question from Feng Yiwang is that given the limitations of the two-party system, should left-leaning voters compromise and support centrist Democrats for the sake of women and trans rights?
Good question.
Well, look, the fact is things would have been better had Kamala Harris been elected, right? She was not ideal in any way. She had great limits. Many of us disagreed with her on her foreign policy, especially on Israel-Palestine, and on migration, quite frankly. But look, even her hardline on migration, which the left disagreed with, wasn't strong enough to attract the right. So I think we have to give up on the idea that only a centrist Democrat will allow us to form a party large enough, popular enough to defeat the right. I think we need to move to the left of that party and see whether we can appeal more broadly to workers and to all those who are disenfranchised and all those who are committed to equality and, well, frankly, constitutional democracy at this point.
Okay, so everyone heard that, right? Judith Butler is literally telling us, listen, okay, so maybe things would be marginally better under Kamala Harris, but Kamala Harris still sucked and we still didn't like her for a reason X, Y, B, and Z, and therefore we should not rely on the Democratic Party. We need to create our own party that is more to the left, that is appealing to workers. That means socialism. By the way, she's not talking about the Democratic Socialists of America. The Democratic Socialists of America, for people like Judith Butler, are still too close to capitalism. We're talking about a radical revolutionary party. That is what she wants, and it's going to be queer Marxist in nature, which means it's going to be really crazy and dystopian. Does everyone understand this? Do I need to explain this again for the umpteenth, thousandth, billionth, quadrillionth time? These are not Democrats. These are not liberals. These are not progressives. Judith Butler is a socialist. She is a far-left radical revolutionary socialist. They do not like the Democrats. They do not want to work with the Democrats. They do not want to vote with the Democrats. Many of these people did not vote for Kamala Harris. I strongly doubt Judith Butler voted for Kamala Harris. I know most of my core audience understands this, but it's just like, it burns me to no end. Every single time I see someone on the so-called right say, Kamala Harris is a communist, Democrats are communists, they're the same thing as communists, they're all the same thing, they're implementing the communist playbook. No, they're not. No, they're not. Let's just listen to that again.
Well, look, the fact is things would have been better had Kamala Harris been elected, right? She was not ideal in any way. She had great limits. Many of us disagreed with her on her foreign policy, especially on Israel-Palestine, and on migration, quite frankly. But look, even her hardline on migration, which the left disagreed with, wasn't strong enough to attract the right. So I think we have to give up on the idea that only a centrist Democrat will allow us to form a party large enough, popular enough to defeat the right. I think we need to move to the left of that party and see whether we can appeal more broadly to workers and to all those who are disenfranchised and all those who are committed to equality and, well, frankly, constitutional democracy at this point. But it's going to be, given the devastations of Trump, it will be a different political landscape when next we have a chance to choose. And I certainly do hope that the Democratic Party opens to all those on the left that it excluded, and that
I'm
it
so
gives up
jealous.
its fanciful ideas that only the center can win.
Thank
Thanks,
you very
Judith.
much for sharing your
Great
take
clip.
on
Thank
this
you, Judith.
question. So the next question from the audience is by Xu Tingdai. So my personal question is what to make of the fact that in a society where civil action is suppressed, such as China, marginalized groups utilize feminism and queer theory to integrate each other. This may be a departure from the original intent of anti-identity politics, but there is also a motivation behind it to rebel against the whole political schema of strong government and weak civil society.
So if I understand correctly, you're saying forms of solidarity can be established outside of both civil society and the state party apparatus on the basis of identity, and that in this way it is most powerful. And if that's what you're saying, then the only thing I would point out is that these are identities that are coming together, which means they're in relationship with one another, and that that it only works to the degree that the alliance itself is a value. And I suppose my point is to say that the value of alliance is a queer value. You can say, and I accept that people now say I am queer, and I say it, and it's happened. It was not something that could happen in the 90s, actually, which may surprise you. But it's okay. But even when we say I am something, we make the identity claim, we're saying it to someone. We're addressing someone with our proclamation about who we are. So we're asking someone to hear what we're saying. We're trying to speak in a way that can be received. And there is this scene of address. There's a interlocution going on, right? So we are already in a social relationship at the moment in which we claim identity. So I want us to remember that. It's like, how do we claim it? For what purpose? To whom and why? So that takes care of my concern that by being identitarian, we might become so particularistic that we separate ourselves off from others. But if what you're telling me is that this is a way to connect, then all good, all good.
Thank you very much, Professor Butler. I noticed that we're nearing the end of our time together, actually. So on behalf of everyone here, I just want to say really thank you, Professor Butler, for engaging with all these questions. And this has been a really incredibly enriching session, and we appreciate everyone's participation, and we hope that you all enjoyed this event. We encourage also everyone to maybe continue exploring Professor Butler's work, and thank you for joining us. Professor Butler, thank you again for your really precious time and insight, and this actually concludes our formal event. So
thank you,
feel free to
Judith.
log off whenever.
That was great, Judith. There's a lot of great clips in that one. Special shout out to Stony Baloney, who also goes by social media comment section, for pointing out that amazing presentation. I really enjoyed it. We got a lot of clips, a lot of Judith Butler at her finest, and welcome to the new people, and congratulations for making it through. I know I can be a handful, I can be a little bit mean sometimes, I can be a little bit aggressive. Just know I do it because I love you and I want you to learn, and I need you to overcome the cognitive distance that's been created for you by so much bullshit going on the right. It's not even funny. And if you guys appreciate the work I do, the very best way you can support it, in addition to super chats, in addition to subscribing to the channel and all that good stuff, is by heading over to my main Substack, which is Carlyn, KARLYN.substack.com, signing up for a membership of $8 a month or $80 a year. You get features and perks like Spy Stream, which is when we go inside live leftist trainings and we watch them together. We already did a Spy Stream this week. We are going to be continuing with the Queer Kink Workshop. If you missed the first part of the Queer Kink Workshop, oh, you missed one for the books. We're going to be continuing that this weekend. We're going to get through a couple more of those presentations. We got all sorts of stuff going on. We do movie nights in the supporter Discord on Sunday nights. You get access to that. We are doing a Tron double feature this week. MacB is watching the second half of Brave New World on Monday. And so lots of stuff going on, all available to members and supporters on my supporter Discord, because I'm 100% completely funded by you guys, and I can't do it without you. And if you want to read the latest book that I'm working on, on. It is called Be Gay, Do Crime, the story of the Mary Nardini gang. Then you can head over to the Red Menace Collective Substack. That is redmenacecollective.substack.com and sign up there. And as an update for the Debunking the Communist Manifesto book, I have no idea if it's going to launch tomorrow, and that really disappoints me because Amazon has bent me over and fucked me on this one, and I'm really upset about it because we were supposed to launch Debunking the Communist Manifesto on the anniversary of Karl Marx's death, which is tomorrow, and Amazon is refusing to approve the book. So maybe they'll do it between now and tomorrow. Maybe they won't. If they don't do it, I'm going to raise holy hell like has never been raised before. But if you are a member of the Red Menace Collective Substack, you can already download a PDF copy of it anyway, and it will go up on Amazon at some point. It will go up for sale at some point, but I won't even go into my whole rant that I did yesterday. They have really messed up on this one, and I'm not happy about it at all. But you know what? There's nothing we can do but continue to move forward. The book will launch when it launches. And that's all we can do. Thankfully, it's not a time-sensitive book. It just would have been nice to launch on the date that I wanted it to launch. And I'm already working on the next one, and there'll be another one after that and another one after that. So if you want to read chapters of the books before they actually get released as a book and get a free digital copy before it gets released to the public, head over to the Red Menace Collective. That is redmenacecollective.substack.com. This is different than my main Substack. It's like a premium perk, and you can sign up over there and get access to all of that stuff. And we are not doing the boner song to leave. We are not doing that. We'll do that another day. All right, guys, I am out of here. Have a good rest of your night. I will see you tomorrow. Take care. We'll see you soon, guys. Bye.
How are you feeling?
Well,
How long have you been here?
3 months, May 17th.
And what brought you here?
That's difficult to answer.
clear. How is it that playing the piano for people has eventually resulted in your being here in the hospital?
That's difficult to answer.